In a world where everyone hunts gods, our protagonist seeks divine remains from an era when gods walked the earth. Before, they were immortal to mortals, until humans awakened sequence abilities. Some awakened the assassin sequence, which allows them to hide their figure. Others awakened the cheater sequence, which allows them to imitate others. But he awakened the God Devourer sequence, something entirely without precedent. Eating gods makes him stronger, so to avoid being dissected, he hides his identity and eats divine remains. We see the entire safe zone is covered by the Kyanding, which isolates the gods. Fortunately, at the exit of the safe zone, there are teams of god hunters who clear the surroundings. There, he hoped he might find some divine remains. Taking advantage of the Saturday, he went to the largest nearby safe zone exit. At this moment, we find ourselves at safe zone exit number 114.514. It was already crowded. In front of the protection gate, there were a dozen people in helmets and bulletproof vests. Just then, two sequence ability users who had completed a hunting mission appeared. They took off their helmets to return, and hundreds of ordinary people nearby immediately swarmed them. He wanted to pass through the crowd to see if there were any divine remains along the way, but he was immediately pushed back. There was no way through, so he could only wait on the outer perimeter. It wasn't until nightfall that he finally reached a closer position. Unfortunately, the joint government inspectors had already taken all the remains away. He found nothing at all, and just when he thought he would get nothing today, he saw a twitching ear falling from the backpack of a sequence awakener. He stared at the twitching ear with eyes wide and bright, swallowing hard as he prepared to snatch it the moment no one was looking. However, a janitor suddenly swept the ear into the trash and walked away, seemingly oblivious to its value. Upon seeing this, he immediately followed the janitor out beyond the exit of the safe zone. Finally, we see him spot the man tossing the ear into a trash can tucked away on a street corner. Once the janitor had finally departed, he ran over, overcome with excitement, to pull open the bin. And yet, he stood there absolutely stunned by the scene waiting for him inside that trash can. It was overflowing with divine remains, a literal feast for a glutton, to be perfectly honest. As he scanned the bin filled to the brim with these sacred remnants, he licked his lips, convinced that he was, quite effectively, the chosen one of heaven. After confirming once more that there wasn't a single soul around to witness him, he reached in and lifted the very thing at the top of the pile that was still twitching. In any normal situation, that disgusting appearance mixed with the metallic scent of blood would have stopped him instantly. But to grow stronger, he suppressed his nausea and forced the morsel into his mouth. After a great deal of chewing, he finally swallowed the mouthful of divine flesh. Surprisingly, though the appearance was somewhat revolting, the taste turned out to be quite good. It was even better, he noted, than the food served back at the school cafeteria. If all divine remains tasted like this, he decided he wouldn't bother with being polite anymore. He smiled greedily and immediately dove into the trash can, beginning to devour large chunks with a ravenous hunger. The strange thing was that no matter how much he ate, he didn't feel full in the slightest. Perhaps, as we might suspect, this bottomless hunger was directly related to his unique sequence ability. After more than an hour, he finally finished devouring every last divine remnant in the trash bin. At that very moment, a mysterious message flickered across his mind. His sequence, the God Devourer, had officially reached a promotion. Current status, level 2. New abilities unlocked, voracious gluttony and blood shadow. It seemed he could now even digest raw gods without any trouble at all. He also gained a new skill called violence, lasting for 10 minutes. His strength, agility, and physical endurance would triple, and he would feel no pain during that time. He had finally ascended, and this new combat ability meant he now possessed a terrifying potential. He was becoming a true master of the hunt, destined to track down deities. After all, scavenging through trash containers wasn't a long-term solution, but he faced a much larger problem. He couldn't let a single soul discover that he belonged to the God Devourer sequence. He needed to find a way to disguise himself and confuse others, and right at that moment, things changed. Disordered footsteps echoed from behind as a criminal came stumbling toward his position. If this man were to discover the anomaly in the trash bin, the consequences would be dire. Fearing the area would soon be locked down, he knew he had to clean the blood off his body and leave. He quickly stuffed over 10 divine remains into his bag, threw it on, and took off running. Fortunately, it was only one criminal. If he were caught with a bag of divine flesh, he'd have no defense. Clutching the blood-stained backpack, he navigated through the dark alleys, planning to run all the way home. But just as he turned a corner in a particularly dark passage, a dagger suddenly came flying out of the shadows. It was aimed directly at his right eye, but luckily, his agility already surpassed that of ordinary men, allowing him to dodge. 3 men stepped out from around the corner, their faces twisted with a ferocity he hadn't expected. They joked about how, even while sleeping, a fat sheep had delivered itself to them, and he coldly asked what they wanted. "What do we want?" they mocked, as if the answer weren't already perfectly obvious. It was a robbery, of course, and though he had no money, he felt an overwhelming sense of anxiety. The divine remains could be exposed at any second, and he knew he had to get away from there immediately. One of them brushed back his greasy hair with a malicious grin, claiming that having no money wasn't a problem. All he had to do was hand over the backpack. It seemed these three were very interested in his cargo. He looked at the bag in his arms and covered the bloodstain with his hand, realizing things were looking quite bad. He told himself he couldn't give it up, even if he tried to claim there was nothing valuable inside. They demanded he open it, noting that a boy running that fast through the alleys looked like someone making an escape. They were convinced he was carrying some sort of shameful treasure hidden away in that bag. If he just left the goods behind, the three of them could pretend they had never seen a thing. Otherwise, they warned him he wouldn't escape a beating, even if he did manage to run away. They threatened to go to the police, claiming they had seen his face clearly under the street lamp when he entered. They had already memorized his features, and hearing this, his feet, ready to bolt, suddenly came to a halt. If these three had truly seen him, the danger of being exposed was far too great to ignore. Deep down, he knew that if they reported him, all his previous hard work would be completely ruined. Left with no other choice, a dark, murderous intent began to rise within his heart. The sudden ferocity in his eyes was immediately noticed by the bandits, who were well acquainted with the city's gray zones. "Boss," one whispered, "the look in this kid's eyes, it's like he actually wants to kill someone." Kill? With what? He was, after all, just a poor boy in their eyes. They reasoned that if he harbored such murderous intent, the treasure in that backpack must be worth a fortune. And so, the three of them decided they would simply take that wealth for themselves. As they spoke, each of the three men drew a knife, the blades glinting in the dark. They lunged to stab him one after another. He had only one goal before, but now, things had changed. If fate demanded their deaths, he told himself, then they could hardly blame him for what came next. With a direct strike, he moved with startling speed, hitting the face of the man closest to him. The moment his fist connected with the man's nose, he clearly felt the vibration of a sharp fracture. The man was sent flying off the ground by the punch, landing nearly 8 meters away. He rolled several times across the stone slabs, before finally coming to a complete stop. The other two witnessed this and shivered with fear, realizing instantly they had provoked a special ability user. Though he had struck them, he hadn't realized his own strength. Despite their terror, the two didn't retreat. It had become a matter of life and death, where begging for mercy would serve no purpose at all. Deep down, they believed the only way to survive this encounter was to kill him first. The two rushed forward even more manically, stabbing wildly with the knives gripped in their hands. His left leg stepped back, and his right leg launched a flying sweep, kicking one of them directly in the waist. More sharp cracks of breaking bones echoed through the air, vibrating right through his own leg. The man's body bent at a strange angle, swinging through the air before crashing into the last remaining bandit. Without a moment's hesitation, he leapt forward, closing the distance to the final attacker. The bandit stood there, dazed and confused, as our protagonist slowly raised his fist once more. "Forgive me, I'll give you all the money I have." It was only at this point that a desperate survival instinct forced the bandit to choose begging for his life. He didn't give the man a chance to keep talking. His fist struck the bandit's cheek, shattering his skull instantly. It was irreversible. After killing 3 people in a row, the bloodlust in his heart gradually faded, replaced by an inexplicable emptiness. He stared into the air with a certain disillusionment, having never expected to become a killer, though, to be fair, it was for self-preservation. There was really nothing left to say as he looked down at the 3 corpses cooling on the ground. Suddenly, he recalled something he had read on the internet once before. It seems there are certain sequences that can read a person's final memories, and he had to ensure he wouldn't be exposed. He wrapped his fists in one of the men's garments and, with grim efficiency, destroyed the heads of all 3. He carefully inspected the scene, cleaning away the bloodstains before searching their clothes for any coin. After taking everything of value, he dragged the 3 bodies into a dark, abandoned warehouse nearby. He set the place ablaze, burning the corpses along with his own blood-stained jacket, a necessary, if drastic, precaution. He did this specifically to prevent any sequencer from tracking him down through the scent of the remains. Once he confirmed the flames had engulfed them, he fled the scene at full speed and finally returned home safely. We see him find a deserted spot where he quickly consumes all the divine remnants hidden in his backpack. He burned the backpack and his jacket as well, then began to count the money he had taken from those 3 thugs. After finishing the count, he sat there stunned. Amidst the pile of common copper coins, something else caught his eye. There was actually a single, brilliant, fluorescent coin sitting right there in his hand. You have to understand, it takes 10,000 copper coins just to exchange for one single silver coin. These gangsters were surprisingly wealthy, and really, what are the odds that 3 rich thugs would ever go to the police? Wasn't this essentially a suicide mission? He had survived, yes, but he had just laid the groundwork for stealing divine remnants. He had also added a murder case to his record, and he didn't dare spend that silver coin. After all, he was just an unemployed orphan. Where would he even get that much money? He realized he needed to find a sequencer identity that could be used in public. No matter what happened, he couldn't tell a soul that he was actually a god devourer. With that in mind, he took 20 copper coins, went to an internet cafe, and logged onto a forum to search for useful information. If a sequencer wants to improve their level, they must follow the specific model provided by the sequence administration. But our protagonist was different. He only needed to consume gods to ascend. In a way, it was as if he had discovered a permanent cheat code for life. If he was going to register with the administration, he had to find a specific sequence to use as a disguise. Finally, his eyes settled on a particular sequence that seemed to fit his needs. The Inner Shadow Assassin, at the level of an assassination apprentice. The skill was called Lifeline, and it allowed the user to act within a 5-minute window. It would double his agility, though after those 5 minutes, he would be weak and barely able to move for half an hour. His own violent ability completely overshadowed the assassin's skill, but right at that moment, things took a turn. Outside the internet cafe, a loud commotion suddenly broke the silence. The owner pleaded, saying it was just a small business, and he couldn't handle the trouble they were bringing. He had just been thinking there might be a report filed, and it seemed his intuition was correct. The police had arrived right at his doorstep, which, naturally, was the worst possible timing, whether they were there for him or not. He knew he had to deal with the situation immediately. In a rush, he deleted his browser history and quickly looked for a way to disguise his appearance. Just as he finished, 7 or 8 police officers burst into the internet cafe. Everyone immediately stepped away from their computers, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Get down to the side with your hands behind your heads," they shouted. They barked orders for everyone to move quickly, ensuring no one could leave the premises. One officer raised his weapon, demanding that everyone keep their hands visible. The officer yelled at him angrily, and he immediately raised his hands in a panic. "Officer, I'm right here," he stammered, trying to appear as harmless as possible. The policeman ran straight toward him, his focus sharp and intimidating. He glanced at the computer screen and said with clear disgust, "Watch less of this kind of stuff. Being young and self-indulgent will only cause you trouble in the future," the officer warned. After delivering that brief lecture, the policeman simply turned and walked away. We see the officers proceed to check the browser history on every single computer in the room. They scrutinized the content until they finally found 2 specific individuals in the cafe. These were young men conducting black market transactions online, and they were promptly taken away. Despite the arrests, the lead officer's expression remained quite solemn. It was a look that suggested their true target hadn't been found yet, which was a lucky break for our friend. The sheer euphoria of escaping such a close call left him feeling strangely relieved. He took a deep breath and decided to reopen the forum to continue his search. But at that exact moment, a mysterious dialog box suddenly popped up on the computer screen. His eyes widened in shock, and he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It was a friendly reminder from Anyao Daily, also known as Wanwan, the very person the police were currently hunting for. "It's you, isn't it? Keep looking at your screen," the message seemed to whisper. The instructions were clear: don't leave when you're finished, but wait for me in the alleyway behind the internet cafe. A few hours later, that middle-aged man, Wanwan, appeared in the small alley with his characteristically greasy face. He noted that the young officer was looking for our friend, and he had a very specific theory as to why. "It's because you killed someone, isn't it?" he asked, cutting straight to the point. Even without a confession, Wanwan knew the last time he visited, it was to check the sequence ability user forum. And now, on this second visit, the police had arrived almost immediately after him. Seeing him quickly delete the forum history led Wanwan to assume that a life must have been taken. The demand was simple. He wouldn't tell a soul about these matters, provided he was given a camp coin. As he demanded payment for his silence, Wanwan's greasy face practically trembled with excitement. He seemed to be celebrating the grand discovery he had made through his own supposedly sharp observation. Our friend fixed Wanwan with a sharp, piercing gaze, acknowledging the man's suspicion about the murder. He wondered why the man wasn't afraid of being killed himself. Wanwan simply wiped the cold sweat from his face and replied. He had already drafted an email to report him, complete with a close-up photo from the surveillance footage. This email was set to be sent to the police station's inbox at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. Every single day, he would reset the timer, pushing the delivery back by another 24 hours. If he were to die, he joked through a few missing yellow teeth, the truth would finally come out. After listening to the threat, our friend offered no response and simply turned to walk out of the alley. Suddenly, Wanwan realized that he didn't even seem to know the young man's name. "By the way, my name is Ladatsi. What's yours?" the man called out as he watched him leave. Our friend simply continued walking back in total silence, ignoring the question entirely. Deep down, he felt there was no need to respond. After all, a dead man has no use for names. After exiting the alley, he slipped into the shadows and began to silently tail Ladatsi. He followed until Ladatsi reached his home, and once the address was noted, he quickly vanished into the night. Killing Ladatsi would be the easy part, but ensuring his secret didn't die with him was another matter. Preventing a leak is a complicated business, and so, on the following day, he passed by the bar. From a distance, we see fun at the school entrance, flanked by several fawning school officials. Since his backpack had been burned the day before, he was naturally stopped by a teacher. "Why aren't you carrying a bag? Don't you do your homework over the weekend?" the teacher demanded. It seems the more undisciplined a school is, the more arbitrary rules it tends to have. Faced with the teacher's strict interrogation, he was just about to offer a rebuttal. Suddenly, a female voice rang out from behind him, addressing the teacher directly. It was Lu Ruyan, claiming that Insean had been at a classmate's house for tutoring all weekend. She explained that his books had simply been left behind at that classmate's home. She told the teacher she had already promised her classmates she would bring the books for him today. He looked back and realized, with some surprise, that his unexpected savior was indeed Lu Ruyan. He had no idea why she was helping him, but he gave a nod and proceeded into the school. Lu Ruyan picked up her pace and quickly caught up to him in the hallway. "Insean, shouldn't you say something?" she asked with a warm smile, to which he coldly replied, "Do you think I should say thank you?" The smile on Lu Ruyan's face froze for a moment before shifting into something else entirely. Adopting a somewhat flirtatious tone, she admitted that she had handled things poorly in the past. "You helped me, and now I've helped you," she suggested, hoping to bridge the gap between them. She asked if they could call it even, adding that she truly enjoyed seeing him worry about her. She went as far as to claim that he was the very motivation for her day. She declared she couldn't live without him, flashing a smile she was certain would captivate him. This cloyingly sweet declaration had been carefully planned by Lu Ruyan and her best friend over the weekend. Based on her understanding of Insean, she was convinced this would be enough to win him over. To call it even, well, he found that idea nothing short of amusing. In his memory, he recalled how he used to prefer going hungry every single day. Just to bring Lu Ruyan breakfast, he would sacrifice his own meals and even do all her homework. And yet, Lu Ruyan would simply take that breakfast and give it to Zhou Yan from the next class to please him. "Lu Ruyan, I've always wanted to ask," he began. "Why do you insist on harassing me?" He asked her quite bluntly if there weren't other classmates more willing to be her lapdog. Lu Ruyan certainly didn't expect Insean to speak to her with such cold honesty. She stood there speechless for a moment, barely managing to ask what he meant by that. He told her that if she wanted to pursue Zhou Yan, she should put in the effort herself. He warned her to stop thinking she could constantly rely on his strength to get what she wanted. It was quite the arrangement. She wanted to bring the boy breakfast, but expected Insean to prepare it. She wanted to impress others with her work, yet expected him to write every single word for her. With words that were nothing short of ruthless, he laid bare Lu Ruyan's true intentions, leaving her visibly shaken for a moment. A look of pure, unadulterated shock washed over her face. He told her flatly to stop bothering him and to find some other lapdog to do her homework for her. He even added a warning. If she didn't stop, he would make sure Zhou Yan found out the truth. We watch as Lu Ruyan's expression shifts through a dozen emotions, each one more unpleasant than the last. Deep down, he felt a wave of relief. It seemed his words had finally hit their mark. Later that afternoon, instead of rushing home, he headed to the library to focus on his work and studies. But what he didn't know was that Lu Ruyan and her best friend had been following him in secret. Her friend whispered, asking if they should really keep following him, worried that he would surely notice them eventually. Lu Ruyan was desperate. She hadn't been able to compare her answers with Zhou Yan, nor with Insean's work. Without the breakfast she usually provided, Zhou Yan had already begun to ignore her entirely. She certainly hadn't expected that someone would discover her secret and question her so directly. And so, while he worked in the library, he was being watched from the shadows. He only began to notice something was off while he was busy tidying the bookshelves. Nearby, he saw a girl sitting on the floor, deeply engrossed in a rather unusual book. Being the polite young man he is, he approached her to remind her that the library was about to close. But when their eyes met, his gaze froze for a moment in complete surprise. She apologized softly, feeling bad for delaying him and Professor Zhu as they finished their shift. The student bowed respectfully to both him and the professor. After that, she headed back toward the school, while Professor Zhu hurried off with her backpack in tow. In that moment, he couldn't help but notice that this girl was truly beautiful. For a brief second, however, he couldn't quite place who she was. Professor Zhu let out a soft sigh, noting that Wen Shu is a very quiet girl, obedient and excellent in her studies. The professor mused that if her own granddaughter were that well-behaved in the future, and then it suddenly clicked for him. It turned out to be Wen Shu, a name that, as it happens, is quite famous around here. With every single exam, she consistently takes the top spot in her year. She is both stunning and brilliant, making her the undisputed pride of the entire school. Naturally, many boys pursue her, but she has a way of subtly turning every one of them down. But much like our protagonist, despite her fame, her family situation is actually quite difficult. She lives alone with her grandmother, though he wondered, what did any of this have to do with him? After leaving the library, he decided to stop by the restroom located just behind the building. Just as he finished and was preparing to head out, something caught his attention. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a slap echoed from right next door. A voice demanded to know if she was the one who told Insean about the secret dealings with Zhou Yan. The other girl replied softly that she didn't even know Insean, nor did she know Zhou Yan. She added that she didn't know her attacker either, which only made the other girl call her stubborn. She pointed out that today at school, Insean had only spoken to her and to Zuli. If it wasn't her, she reasoned, then it must have been that old hag Zuli. Rian seems to believe that even a girl like Wenshu, who is pretty and smart, must be hiding something. In her eyes, they all have the hearts of snakes and scorpions. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but she was convinced. In her view, they simply use their charms to flirt with various men whenever it suits them. Originally, our protagonist wanted absolutely nothing to do with Lu Ruyan. However, he realized that Wenshu had been innocently dragged into this mess because of him. Out of a sense of ethics, he decided he had to intervene, so he washed his hands and headed toward the women's restroom. He told Lu Ruyan that she was making far too much noise, not even letting him use the restroom in peace. He asked if she would only be satisfied if he went and told Zhou Yan everything. Lu Ruyan stood there, completely stunned for a moment by his sudden appearance. She told Insean to calm down and not to be so extreme in his actions. She argued that she hadn't caused him any trouble, so she couldn't understand why he was interfering. Not wanting to deal with her, he simply stepped forward and pulled Wenshu out of the situation. He noted that the 2 slaps had been delivered by her, and it was time to settle the score. Wenshu looked at him without showing any gratitude. After all, she had only been targeted because of him. As soon as he finished speaking, he delivered 2 sharp slaps right back to Lu Ruyan. Everyone present was left speechless, and Wenshu stared at him in surprise, unable to understand this strange classmate's behavior. She hadn't expected him to act so decisively, and Lu Ruyan, covering her face, glared at him with pure rage. He told her to stop barking, stating that whatever was between the 2 of them was now settled. As for what happened between her and Wenshu, he considered the debt paid, which, naturally, was his way of ending it. Lu Ruyan's eyes flashed with a terrifying ferocity in that moment. She warned Insean that he would regret this, while he suddenly remembered something about Wenshu. He recalled that Lu Ruyan's uncle happened to be a rather dangerous thug. He wasn't afraid of thugs himself, but he worried that Wenshu might end up getting hurt. After all, he couldn't exactly spend every waking moment watching over both Wenshu and Lu Ruyan. In that moment, an excellent idea suddenly occurred to him to keep Wenshu out of harm's way. Lu Ruyan warned him he'd regret this, but he simply told her he'd be heading to a cyber cafe to write an email detailing everything about her. He explained that he would schedule it to land in Zhou Yan's inbox the following Monday morning. If anything happened to him or Wenshu, she could expect a very messy breakup with Zhou Yan. Lu Ruyan had originally planned to have her uncle teach them a lesson, or even remove them from the safe zone entirely. But Insean had effectively blocked that path, leaving her with no moves left to play. She was absolutely furious, claiming she had never met anyone as wicked as he was. He simply gave a cold snort, took Wenshu by the arm, and turned to leave without another word. Deep down, he felt quite satisfied, realizing how many times he had thought about Lu Dazi that day. It was the first time he felt that knowing someone like Lu Dazi had actually brought him something positive. The next morning, he left his house and returned to the entrance of the cyber cafe once again. This time, we see that the person behind the counter wasn't Lu Dazi, but a middle-aged man with a beard. The opportunity had arrived. He pulled down his cap to avoid the cameras and beckoned the man over. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, but he eventually decided to step outside anyway. Returning to the spot where he had spoken to Lu Dazi, he asked if the man was the owner of the shop. He claimed that one of the 2 men the police had taken away that day was a friend of his. He told the owner his friend had left something behind and that he needed to see the recordings from that day. The owner simply snorted, thinking this was just some brat trying to pull a fast one on him. The owner asked him if he really thought he could just access the recordings whenever he pleased. Insean countered by saying that what was left for him was worth 20 silver coins, and he'd offer one as a reward. With that, he pulled out a silver coin and asked again what his friend had left behind. The coin, emitting a faint white glow under the starlight, immediately caught the shop owner's greedy attention. The owner's eyes flickered with interest before he finally led Insean to a small, dark warehouse next to the cafe. He told him that all the recordings were kept there and asked what exactly he was looking for. Insean nodded, saying he would search for a while, and began reviewing the security footage. When he finally found the footage from that day, he realized the recordings held the key to everything. The man introduced himself as Guan Defa, though he told Insean he could just call him Afa. Insean simply noted the name, telling Afa he would certainly remember it. He promised to report back on the matter, assuring the man that as long as he was fine, there would be no trouble. After leaving the cyber cafe, he allowed himself a small smile and began heading toward Lu Dazi's house. By now, he was 99% certain of the truth. He felt confident that he could finally resolve the entire situation regarding Lu Dazi. Every piece of evidence told him the same thing. Lu Dazi had been lying to him all along. The supposed screenshots of the recordings that had been used to threaten him didn't even exist. Finally, he could rest easy and effectively sign Lu Dazi's death warrant. He broke into a run, moving through the streets as fast as his legs could carry him. Upon reaching Lu Dazi's home, he slowed down, creeping up to the front door on his tiptoes. There was trash piled at the entrance, and to simulate a break-in, he chose not to force the door, but simply kept knocking. Insean lowered his voice, doing his best to sound like a 30-year-old neighbor from next door. He complained loudly that the trash in front of the door smelled terrible and demanded it be moved immediately. From inside, Lu Dazi's impatient voice rang out, asking what business it was of some mental patient. He shouted back that the trash wasn't blocking the hallway and that there was plenty of room to pass. Seeing that Lu Dazi was flatly refusing to open the door, our protagonist decided to change his tactics. He threatened to keep shouting and warned that if the door didn't open, he would simply wait right there at the entrance. He added that eventually, Lu Dazi would have to leave for work, and then he'd personally complain to the boss. Upon hearing this, the bravado of the corrupt official Lu Dazi weakened almost instantly. He grumbled that he was coming, clearly annoyed by the persistent neighbor, or so he thought. He promised to throw the trash out in a little while, trying to buy himself just a bit more time. Insean insisted it be done right now, and finally, Lu Dazi relented, telling him to wait just a moment. The sound of rustling clothes followed as the man dressed himself to head out with the garbage. Lu Dazi finally reached the entrance, and we hear the distinct click of the lock turning. He was just about to say, "Here I am," but before the words could leave his mouth, he lost consciousness. He collapsed instantly. Insean had carefully controlled his strength the very moment the door swung open. He delivered a sharp uppercut directly to Lu Dazi's chin, knocking him out cold before slipping quickly inside. He caught the man's obese body to prevent the sound of the fall from alerting any of the neighbors. In one fluid motion, he shut the door tight and dragged Lu Dazi toward the bedroom. After tying him up, he stuffed the man's own smelly socks into his mouth and began searching the house. To be honest, there wasn't much to find. Lu Dazi only had a few hundred copper coins to his name. He didn't actually need the money, but he had to take it anyway to make the scene look like a common robbery. After being busy for a while, we hear a muffled sob coming from behind him. He turned around to find that Lu Dazi had already woken up and was staring at his bound self in pure horror. Lu Dazi shook his head desperately, trying to beg for mercy, before his eyes turned fierce as if attempting to threaten him. Insean spoke as if it were nothing, mentioning that he had spoken with Juan Defa today and inviting the man to guess the topic. Lu Dazi was stunned, the corners of his eyes twitching incessantly as he stared at the smile of the person standing before him. It was as if he were looking at a demon. Insean walked to the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of cooking oil and a stack of bags. Greed, as they say, must always come with the awareness that there is a price to be paid. He had come to collect that price, and minutes later, he felt a sense of relief watching Lu Dazi being swallowed by serpents of fire. He left the house, ran down the stairs shouting fire, and then headed toward the campus as if nothing had happened. Thanks to his excellent physical condition and his violent skills, he escaped Lu Dazi's neighborhood and reached the school in no time. The journey took only 5 or 6 minutes, which, while slower than his usual pace, was perfectly acceptable for his plan. It was an almost perfect alibi, and he hoped the police would close the case as quickly as possible. Ideally, they would simply classify the whole ordeal as a tragic robbery gone wrong. In a few days, once the storm had passed, he knew he should head to the sequence administration to officially register. This lingering sensation of having his neck strangled was becoming quite bothersome. It was even more painful than what he felt with science, and he told himself he must be careful not to get caught in the future. He finally arrived at the school, making sure to keep his expression calm and serene. No one could have imagined, of course, that just 10 minutes earlier he had taken a man's life. That afternoon, as he finished tidying the library shelves, he saw Wensu studying there, just as she did every single day. And so, we see them leaving the school together, eventually arriving back at the same fork in the road from yesterday. As they were about to part ways, Wensu said her goodbyes, but just as she turned to leave, he suddenly grabbed her backpack strap. He offered a smile, though his eyes remained cold and entirely indifferent. He told her he would walk her home today, leaving Wensu completely confused by the sudden gesture. She couldn't help but wonder why Insean seemed like a completely different person all of a sudden. She insisted it wasn't necessary, but without giving her a chance to argue, he took her hand and began walking toward her house. Wensu frowned, trying to pull her hand away, until she heard him speak in a very low, serious tone. He mentioned that he had warned Lu Ruyan yesterday and hadn't expected her to have the nerve to follow him again today. At that moment, Wensu was caught entirely off guard by the revelation. She looked back in a panic, searching the shadows, but she couldn't see anything at all. With a hint of fear in her voice, Wensu pointed out that her house wasn't even in this direction. He simply scanned the alleyway, looking left and right with a calculating gaze. Then he looked at her and smiled, asking if she really thought he would commit a murder right in front of her doorstep. The word murder made Wensu's eyes widen even further in shock. She wanted to believe he was joking, but that cold look from a moment ago told her he was perfectly serious. She asked what Lu Ruyan could possibly do, suggesting she could just slap her and send her away. He looked back and clarified that it wasn't Lu Ruyan he was worried about. With a disdainful smile, he continued pulling Wensu along through the narrow streets. Wensu looked back as well, and that was when she noticed 7 or 8 dark shadows suddenly emerging in the alley they had just passed. These figures were armed, carrying iron bars and short daggers that caught the light, a far cry from a simple schoolyard grudge. Wensu immediately looked up, her face gripped by a sudden, sharp panic. She looked at him, her voice trembling as she realized those men were coming for them. She explained it must be Lu Ruyan's uncle, a notorious local thug who already had blood on his hands. As for why he was following them, Insein took a moment to reflect on the situation. The goal was likely to kill them both, starting, most probably, with a brutal beating for him. As he speculated on what they might do to her, Wensu instinctively covered her neck in fear. She couldn't understand why they'd go so far, but it all came back to the words he'd said yesterday. He asked if she hadn't heard him herself, referring to the scandal involving Zhou Yan. We might wonder who this Zhou Yan is, likely just an ordinary person, all things considered. However, the uncle had recently awakened a sequence ability, which changed everything. Because of this, he had developed a certain tendency to throw his weight around lately. It seemed Lu Ruyan wanted to cling to Zhou Yan to secure the life of a wealthy lady. But Wensu remembered his threat and asked about the scheduled email he'd set up to stop them. He offered her a faint, knowing smile and admitted that he had simply been bluffing. Meanwhile, the group of men continued to close the distance, drawing nearer with every second. In a voice thick with desperation, she asked if this was where they were going to die. He told her it was his fault for getting her involved in this mess to begin with. And so, he decided right then that he would be the one to handle the situation. His smile took on a slightly aggressive edge, a look that was, to be honest, quite threatening. He looked at her and asked if she was the kind of person who could keep a secret. Wensu didn't quite understand what Insein meant by that. But she nodded anyway, and seconds later, 5 or 6 burly men armed with knives and clubs approached them. The man leading the pack, his body covered in tattoos, looked at him and burst into a mocking laugh. He asked why he wasn't running, taunting him by saying he probably wasn't very good at it anyway. Insein replied with pure disdain, noting that since he had already reached his destination, there was no reason to run. One of the thugs looked around, confused, wondering what on earth he meant by reaching the place. He soon realized they were standing in an ancient, completely abandoned courtyard. The tattooed man sneered, asking what could possibly be so special about a place like this. Insein calmly explained that it was a very special spot indeed, one perfectly suited for killing people. The men were taken aback for a moment, but then, mocking smiles spread across their faces. They asked if he was an idiot, claiming they'd never seen a victim pick out their own burial ground before. However, at that exact moment, he blurred into a residual image and launched a flying kick straight into one of their chests. No one actually saw what happened, they only saw their companion standing right next to them suddenly go flying through the air, leaving the others to look back in a state of total panic. In an instant, that man's chest was crushed like a deflated ball, completely flattened by the impact. Just before it happened, his face had been a mask of pure shock and terror. The dark atmosphere blurred his features, adding a grim layer to the scene. It was a sight that filled everyone present with an inexplicable, bone-chilling fear. Seeing their comrade in such a state, they immediately realized that Insein was a sequence wielder. They couldn't believe it. How could a student with awakened sequence abilities be in a dump like Wan's school? Before they even had a chance to react, he launched another punch, striking with the force of a cannonball. He hit one of them square in the throat, and the man collapsed as his head snapped back like a broken kite. The body flew several meters through the air, landing right in front of Wensu and making her scream in terror. The rest of the group scrambled back several paces, desperate to put some distance between themselves and the boy. And yet, we get the feeling that when Wensu screamed, she didn't actually seem all that frightened. Insein pushed aside any thoughts about how strange she was acting and turned his gaze toward the survivors. The tattooed man was trembling with pure fear, cold sweat pouring down his face as he stood there, completely paralyzed. It was as if he'd lost his soul, while the 2 other survivors immediately began to beg, "Big brother, have mercy." They pleaded for a second chance, desperately claiming they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. They insisted that a man named Changlong told them to come, and that this had nothing to do with them. Insein paid them no mind, simply delivering 2 swift kicks directly to their chins, which was quite a final answer. The 2 men were sent flying backward, landing headfirst with 2 sickening thuds against the ground. And just like that, they departed together for the next world, a permanent retirement, one might say. In the end, only the tattooed man remained, his very soul shaking so violently he was unable to speak. Insein gave him a casual pat on the shoulder and asked, with genuine interest, if he knew about his history with Lu Ruyan. He noted that he originally might have called the man uncle, but unfortunately, things had changed. Changlong reacted instantly, forcing a smile that looked even more miserable than his own daughter's expression. He stammered that there was still a chance, and that they could still be a family, which was a bit optimistic. He promised to teach Lu Ruyan's son a lesson for being so indiscreet, swearing he would make things right. Insein let out a feigned sigh of helplessness, reminding him that what's done is done. He was a sequence wielder now. Insein looked at him and asked why he would humiliate himself like this, essentially licking his boots just to suffer further. He then questioned the man, asking if he hadn't previously claimed that Lu Ruyan was the sole hope for their family. Changlong nodded in a daze, clearly failing to understand the dark direction Insein's thoughts were taking. Insein made it clear that as long as he was still breathing, their family would never have a shred of hope left. However, he offered to show them a new path, an offer the man desperately accepted, promising to do whatever was asked. The man insisted that whatever Insien commanded, they would certainly carry it out without question. Insien suggested they go to another world to rebuild their family, before delivering a final, brutal slap to Changlin's face. The man's head spun a full 360 degrees before he collapsed lifelessly to the side. Insien whispered that he shouldn't worry, as he wouldn't be traveling that lonely road to the afterlife by himself. He promised that once he had some free time, he would send the rest of the family down to keep him company. After he had finished disposing of everyone, we see him let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. It was another killing, though he found himself wondering exactly how many lives he had taken by now. He couldn't remember, nor did it seem to matter, as he turned his gaze toward Wensu standing at the edge of the patio. As he approached her, he noticed that Wensu was trembling from head to toe, visibly shaken by the display. He remarked that out in the wasteland, she was actually a sequence wielder herself, which changed things. Then, she surprised him by asking if he had thought about how he was going to get rid of all the bodies. To be honest, Insien hadn't expected Wensu to be worried about the logistics of the crime scene. He asked if she wasn't afraid he might kill her too, a question that caught Wensu completely off guard. She scratched her head in genuine confusion, looking at him as if the idea hadn't even crossed her mind. She simply asked why he would kill her, just because she had witnessed him committing a few murders. But when Shu wasn't convinced, noting that if he truly wanted her dead, he could simply let her walk home alone. The others would surely take care of it for him, so why would he go through all the trouble himself? Insien nodded in agreement, realizing that she was far more observant than she let on. To be honest, it was the first time he had witnessed such a scene and remained so remarkably calm. We see him begin to toss the bodies into a nearby well, listening to the dull thud as they hit the bottom. To avoid any chance of being discovered, he didn't even stop to take the money from their pockets. Since it was a dry well, he eventually moved a heavy stone to cover the opening completely. He told himself it was enough, as there was no one else around to witness his work. When Shu urged them to leave, pointing out that they were leaving their scent all over the area. If the police were to investigate, she warned, they would likely be able to track them down. When he asked what she suggested, she simply told him to burn the evidence away. She argued that since the place was deserted, a fire wouldn't draw attention and would effectively mask their scent. However, she quickly reconsidered, noting that burning everything wasn't strictly necessary. The food from the dining hall, she pointed out, had an incredibly strong and pungent odor. She suggested scattering the leftovers around the area and throwing some down into the well itself. In a very short time, the smell of the food would naturally overpower and cover their own tracks. Insien nodded, though he couldn't help but look at her with a growing sense of curiosity. He wondered where she had learned such things, to which she simply replied that she enjoyed reading. She claimed she had seen it in books, leaving him to wonder what kind of books actually taught that. He asked what she was reading, as there shouldn't be manuals on how to commit the perfect crime. Insien looked again at the fragile girl before him, who barely reached his chin, and sighed, realizing people truly cannot be judged by appearances. Once back at her home, when Shu took several deep breaths, trying her best to steady her emotions after everything that had happened, she finally turned and opened the door, softly calling out to her grandmother. As soon as she announced she was back, the candle in the room was lit, casting a warm glow. Even though the grandmother is blind, she always sits by that candle every day, waiting for her granddaughter to return from school. And once when Shu is safely inside, she lights the flame for her, a small but meaningful ritual. The old woman asked why she was so late today, calling her by her nickname, Nan Nan. When Shu simply replied that she had run into a few things, which was certainly one way of putting it, she went straight to the kitchen and began serving the food she had brought home from the dining hall earlier. A series of soft clinking sounds echoed as she set the glass containers down. As she listened to the sounds of Shu keeping herself busy in the kitchen, the grandmother's smile gradually faded, replaced by a look of deep bitterness and concern. She sighed to herself, sensing the scent of another person lingering on the girl's clothes. Worse still, she caught the faint metallic tang of blood, suspecting Shu had gone out to kill with someone again. We move to the following afternoon, where we find Insien returning to the familiar surroundings of the internet cafe. He knew he had to register as a sequencer before the college entrance exams if he wanted any hope of applying to a sequencer university. He found Wandefa and got straight to the point, telling him he wanted to report a false sequence to the administration. When he asked what he should keep in mind, Wandefa immediately looked away, his eyes darting nervously. The man stammered, asking why he was being consulted, claiming he couldn't possibly know the answer. He insisted he was just an ordinary person who wouldn't dare get involved in matters concerning the administration. Insien sat down in the chair and crossed his legs, looking quite comfortable. He asked Wandefa if he really thought that silver coin had been so easy to earn. The truth was, if he wanted to register a false sequence, he couldn't simply walk through the front door. He would need to find someone to help him, someone on the inside. But who? The very idea that someone within the administration would dare to help falsify records was shocking. And yet, even within the Sequenceability Administration, there are those willing to bend the rules. Defa hesitated for a moment, claiming he had no idea who could provide such a dangerous favor. Inci pressed him, asking for at least a name, someone who knew the inner workings of the administration. Finally, the man gave in, the police officer, Luo Yi. He explained that one day, 3 years ago, she had come to see him. She had asked him to set up a computer with a hidden IP address for her. On the screen, she was messaging someone, hoping that person could help her obtain a new identity. Inci nodded, having heard enough, but he told the man he still needed one more thing. We moved to the following morning, where the officers are arriving at the police station one by one. Luo Yi was among them when a colleague mentioned she had received a letter. She took the envelope, feeling a bit confused as she looked at the strange, twisted handwriting. She wasn't sure when it had arrived, perhaps last night, or maybe early this morning. Thinking it might just be a child's prank, she smiled and opened the envelope to take a look. But as she read the contents, the smile on her face froze instantly. The message was simple, 7 o'clock tonight, in a deserted alleyway. Luo Yi stared intently at the masked figure standing deep within the shadows. You were looking for me, she said, to which he replied that he wanted an introduction to the person who falsified her sequence. Luo Yi's pupils dilated suddenly as she processed the masked stranger's bold request. He calmly advised her to remove her right hand from the pistol hidden beneath her trench coat. He warned her that even if a shot rang out, she wouldn't be able to kill him. And once that happened, there would be no turning back, leaving Luo Yi to question his certainty. To be honest, she hadn't expected this person to see right through her subtle movements. Such sharp perception and predictive ability were rare, yet she still kept her hand firmly on the gun. She told him he was overconfident, doubting that his movements could ever be faster than a bullet. He told her not to bother, explaining that before coming, he had scheduled a mass email to be sent to the police station. By tomorrow morning, the entire station would know that her sequence was a complete fabrication. If he didn't return tonight to delay the timer, she would be exposed, making his death a hollow victory. Luo Yi was stunned. She truly hadn't expected the masked figure standing before her to be so prepared. He clearly had an ace up his sleeve, and for the first time, she felt a genuine flicker of fear. Furthermore, he stated quite simply that she didn't have the power to kill him at all. While Luo Yi stood there dazed, he activated a violent ability, kicking off the ground with immense force. He shot forward like a bolt, and by the time he stopped, Luo Yi's pistol was already in his hand. He reminded her that he had been telling her the truth all along, even if she refused to believe it. Sometimes, facts are the only way to prove a point, and Luo Yi's gaze instantly turned to one of pure terror. She confessed she didn't know the person's identity, only that friends had told her he could handle such a request. She explained that she only knew one thing. The person was a regular client in a chat room called Exequasu. To find him, one had to enter the chat room 8 times in a row, and he would proactively make contact. Having shared everything she knew, she tentatively asked if he could return her weapon. We see him mentally reviewing Luo Yi's words before he looked up to meet her gaze once more. He simply shook his head, noting that getting the gun back would require paying a different price. He demanded to know her real sequence, a request she dismissed as nothing more than a dream. Luo Yi trembled with pure rage, finding his cold, murderous intent to be utterly bone-chilling. She cried out that it hadn't been easy for her to finally become a police officer. She asked if this ruthless demon wouldn't be satisfied until he had completely destroyed everything she worked for. Sequence. No matter how much Luo Yi raved or complained, he only repeated the question with icy indifference. When Luo Yi finally opened her eyes, her focus returned to the man standing before her. Her eyes were bloodshot from the sheer madness of the moment, and we wonder if she had finally broken. A single tear escaped, sliding slowly down her cheek as she reached her limit. Pleasure. She revealed her sequence was pleasure, offering a desperate, hollow smile after the confession. He looked at her, and it was as if her very spirit had been sucked right out of her body. At that moment, he finally understood exactly why Luo Yi had chosen to hide her sequence identity. The pleasure sequence is most famous for its level 1 ability, known as extreme pleasure. And as it turns out, extreme pleasure isn't just effective on humans, it works on the gods themselves. Therefore, those of the pleasure sequence usually hide their identities, living as ordinary people to stay safe. Because once their secret is discovered, it marks the beginning of an eternal and inescapable doom. But he didn't stop there, noting that the street was completely deserted at that hour. He commanded her to use the extreme pleasure ability on him, asking if she really wanted to be pushed into a dead end. She pleaded with him, crying out that she had already told him everything and wondering what more he could possibly want. Luo Yi's voice eventually faded away, yet he remained entirely expressionless, unmoved by her distress. He insisted she activate the ability, needing to confirm for himself that she truly belonged to the pleasure sequence. Otherwise, he warned her that he would simply leave with her weapon, which, naturally, was a threat she couldn't ignore. She felt she had finally won. She wiped away her tears and began to fix her messy hair. She insisted she wasn't a hedonist and asked him, with some curiosity, how he had even discovered her secret. He had managed to discharge half of the energy, and everything slowly returned to its original state. She asked if she could have her gun back now, but he told her she would have to wait 10 minutes. He demanded she release the Titan ability once more, wanting to see if she was a true Titan or just a cheater imitating the skill. Deep down, he knew that if he was right, those of the cheater's sequence couldn't imitate the same ability twice in a row. Luo Yi's relaxed smile vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, sharp tension. She remarked on how truly troublesome he was, admitting that, in the end, he was right about her. She confessed to being from the cheater's sequence, and he simply nodded his head in silent acknowledgement. He had finally managed to prove it, telling her she had almost succeeded in fooling him completely. He warned her that while she was very clever, she would be wise to be much more careful in the future. He told her not to fall into the hands of Olafop, as that would likely result in him being implicated as well. Following the method Luo Yi had shared, he successfully managed to make contact with the people in the chat. Just as he was preparing to leave, we hear the sudden, frantic cry of one Defa echoing from outside. "Officer, it's very late. My internet cafe is just about to close," we hear one Defa pleading. He asked what they were doing there again, as the police had arrived to conduct a surprise inspection. Juan Defa reminded him of this loudly, and Encian immediately understood the hidden meaning behind his words. The Alliance had already cleared the browser history, but before he could even think of a way to prove his innocence, the warehouse door was thrown open, and the person who entered wasn't Juan Defa, but a man in civilian clothes. He wore a scarf, carried a carved cigar, and possessed a striking head of silver hair. A few more people followed him inside, all of them dressed in standard police uniforms. "Inspector Olafop, how did you get here, sir?" one of them asked with clear deference. Encian realized this was Olafop, the very detective Luo Yi had warned him about just moments ago. He wondered what exactly he should be looking out for, his mind racing with a flurry of questions. The inspector questioned why a team was inspecting a cafe at night, specifically regarding the 3 bodies found in the alley. Or perhaps they were investigating the illegal dissection of divine remains, a much more serious matter. Olafop didn't answer. Instead, he gave Encian a cold order not to move, which he wisely chose to follow. He obediently took his hands off the mouse and keyboard, leaving the computer screen completely blank and idle. Olafop glanced at the computer, saw the logs had been wiped, and his gaze toward Encian turned instantly sharp. When asked about his relationship with Juan Defa, Encian claimed they were simply friends. He answered hesitantly, looking quite guilty, while Olafop exhaled a condescending puff of smoke and asked what kind of friends. Encian claimed he was always given money after their meetings, a statement that left everyone in the room utterly stunned. The officers looked at Juan Defa with extreme disgust, while the man himself stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. He was a soulless shell in that moment, while Encian felt a wave of feigned innocence as the police watched him coldly. Juan Defa turned bright red with rage, shouting that they shouldn't believe him, as Encian was just a pauper with nothing to offer. "Our shop owner is indeed an old fox." He immediately understood the plan, and the more he protested, the more the police believed Encian. The officers felt a wave of sympathy for the young man while condemning Juan Defa's behavior, as Olafop extinguished his cigar in a water cup. The inspector told him to go home and rest before leaving the warehouse, followed by the others, while Encian went to register his sequence as agreed. With his sequence now officially on the books, he knew the principal would soon learn of his awakening, meaning tomorrow, he could do as he pleased. The next morning, he arrived at school with great expectations, finding the principal standing at the gate, though not for a routine inspection this time. We see a bright red banner celebrating Encian, a senior student, for successfully becoming a sequence user, as the principal checked a photo in his hand. He looked from the photo to the boy and immediately recognized the student before him as the new pride of the school, Encian. The principal offered his warmest congratulations on the awakening, while the surrounding students whispered in shock that someone from such a poor background had succeeded. Some told others to lower their voices, wondering if they too might have a chance to awaken now that a sequence user stood among them. The principal reached out for a handshake, but since Encian had a lunchbox in one hand and the other in his pocket, he didn't give him the satisfaction. The principal's expression froze, sensing that things weren't quite right, so he simply smiled awkwardly and invited him to his office for a chat. A nearby teacher nodded subserviently, mentioning they had prepared a celebration, and Encian realized it was the same department head who had caused him trouble. He coldly asked if the man remembered him, leaving the teacher stunned and searching his memory for any previous interaction between them. After a moment, the teacher asked if he was his student, but Encian simply shook his head, claiming he didn't recognize the man either. He remarked that it was a small matter easily forgotten by those who hadn't suffered it, before suddenly slamming his lunchbox into the teacher's face. The man was sent flying several meters as Encian casually tossed the dented lunchbox into the principal's arms, telling him to buy him a new one. He walked onto the campus under the piercing gaze of the crowd, eventually finding Principal Lee, whose face shifted from despair to a practiced smile. The principal asked why he had come, assuming he wouldn't participate in the sequence evaluations until after the university entrance exams. Encian admitted he still didn't understand the process, while the injured teacher limped away, clutching his chest in a state of complete disbelief. It was true that he had relied on his intuition, as there was nothing else to see in such an extreme world, which, to be honest, had left him feeling quite disappointed. He realized then that without power, there was simply nothing more he could do for his family. Next, he skillfully opened the Sequence Education Forum to search for the skill evaluations related to the university entrance exams. Lishenman sighed and turned to leave the principal's office, heading out to find a nearby place to rest. And here we see him clicking on a post marked as featured. It was a comprehensive evaluation guide for Sequence users preparing for their university entrance exams. We learned that Sequence users don't actually need to participate in the standard university entrance exams. There is, in fact, a completely separate evaluation method reserved just for them. One special situation can even exempt a student from the exam entirely, having a registered record of hunting gods. Instead of standard grades, one can submit god hunting points along with a resume to apply for the top universities. He considered this option, thinking of the immense combat power his God Devourer sequence had granted him. He felt a sudden surge of euphoria, realizing this was his golden ticket to the best university in the land. Just then, the computer emitted a sharp beep, breaking his train of thought. It seems Lishenman had forgotten to log out of his messages, and curiosity, that old friend, prompted the boy to open the chat. We see a message from a user named Tintin, addressed quite affectionately to Brother Tianmin. She told him she missed him and asked if he could keep her company later that night. She even sent a rather scandalous video, which he watched in its entirety with a look of stern, moral judgment. He eventually clicked the X to close the window, though he made sure to download the video first. But when he opened the downloads folder, he found himself completely stunned by what he saw. There were dozens of them, making him wonder if Lishenman was really just an ordinary principal. Thinking about this, he immediately opened the information section for people with sequence abilities. He entered Lishenman's name, and, sure enough, he found the reason why the man was so popular with women in this world. There was only one explanation. He was a person with sequence abilities. It turned out that Lishenman was also a sequence user, just like our protagonist. But he had been a principal for so many years, and it seemed that not a single student knew his secret. When he opened Lishenman's personal file, he was immediately drawn to the first two lines. Lishenman, a sequence shaman, had been involved in an incident in Area 14 that caused dozens of deaths, leading to his transfer from the Foundation. Currently, he was working as the principal at one school, a quiet life, or so it seemed. The principal was responsible for the deaths of dozens of people, and yet, he could still be appointed to lead a school. He wondered just how powerful the man's foundation was, and exactly who was backing him from the shadows. Suddenly, he felt that when he had spoken to the principal just a moment ago, his voice might have been a bit too loud. Deep down, he realized he hadn't shown the proper respect one should give to such a dangerous teacher. He decided it was best not to return here in the future, preferring to go back to intimidating the weak with Wandefa. It was clearly not a good idea to mess with the principal, so he quickly stood up from his seat. He hadn't even reached the door when he heard Lishenman's voice saying that, since he had seen everything, he shouldn't leave just yet. The principal invited him to sit back down so they could chat for a while, an invitation that felt more like a command. At that exact moment, he discovered that his body had suddenly lost all control. His feet seemed to be glued to the floor, which, to be honest, was a rather terrifying development. Unable to move even an inch, he heard the man call him Student Ian and tell him once more to sit down. When he turned his head to look, a colorful, mysterious mask had suddenly appeared on Lishenman's face. He couldn't believe it. Lishenman actually dared to use his sequence abilities against him. The principal offered a deal. He could help with deity hunting and guarantee his university admission. To be honest, his experience and connections could certainly pave the way into a top school. As a condition, however, he wanted help clearing his name of what he called a fabricated charge. He had lost his status, his rights, and even his wife had left him in the aftermath. The man was clearly desperate, hoping that a student could somehow help change his luck. Helping him change his luck? Well, that was certainly a tall order for a teenager. Incredulous, our protagonist pointed at himself, a mere student who had only just awakened his abilities. While he might have been a bit cocky, he wasn't so ignorant as to ignore the risks involved. After listening to Lishenman's proposal, he fell into a long, thoughtful silence. Finally, he spoke up, admitting that while the offer was tempting, the logic was a bit flawed. A deal with such disproportionate benefits and risks is almost always destined for failure. He suggested changing the terms. First, he would help complete a specific god-hunting task. In exchange, the principal would provide the greatest possible support for his university admission issues. But as for clearing the man's name, he admitted that was simply beyond his current reach. That goal was far too ambitious. After all, one must eat a meal one bite at a time. It was hardly realistic to expect everything to be resolved in a single stroke. Lishenman agreed and asked for just one thing first: help finding someone with the cheater sequence. Upon hearing this specific request, he found himself feeling more than a little surprised. The reason was simple. The murder accusation stood because someone had seen a shaman sequence user at the scene. I'm the only one with a registered shaman sequence, Lishenman explained, his voice heavy with the weight of the accusation. He suspected a cheater had been at the scene, mimicking his appearance to frame him, a classic, if rather cruel, setup. After listening to the story, our protagonist wasn't entirely sure if he could pull this off. However, for him, it was actually a piece of cake. He knew Officer Luo Ji belonged to that exact sequence. Director Lee, I can accept your terms, he said, finally breaking his silence. But he offered a fair warning. He couldn't guarantee that this person would actually be willing to help. Lee Shinmin agreed immediately, relieved that the first step, finding the cheater, was finally settled. The rest he would handle himself, certain that once a fraudster's true sequence is revealed, an entire organization usually follows. We then see them turn to the hunt. Our young hero wanted to know exactly how the god-hunting squads were chosen. He had studied the laws and knew that if an orphan like him died in battle, the compensation was $1 million. Deep down, he worried about joining a group of unscrupulous people who might just kill him for the payout. Lee Shinmin suggested a bold alternative. He should simply be a one-man team, standing as his own squad. This way, he could earn double points, with the director acting as his insurer and companion, a generous offer, to be sure. On the following day, he donned his gear and left the school, with Lee following close behind him. It was only then that the teachers and students realized Director Lee was actually a powerful sequence user. An hour later, as the gates shut behind them, the familiar safety of the school finally faded away. As the outer gates slowly groaned open, he faced the world outside the safe zone for the very first time. Director Lee, follow me, he said, choosing the path with the fewest people and moving forward with purpose. Lee Shinmin was surprised for a moment by the boy's confidence, but he didn't question it and followed along. They walked for a long time until, looking around, we see they were finally, completely alone. It was nearly time, so he pulled a black glass bottle from his backpack and carefully unscrewed the lid. These were the insecticide phosphorus scales he had requested earlier when he first received his equipment. He wondered if a minor god would appear for his first hunt, and after waiting 30 minutes, he finally heard a commotion. Get ready, he whispered to himself, noting there were only 10 seconds left. After hearing this, Lee Tianmin quietly retreated to the back to stay out of sight. He left Xian at a distance, so no one could claim the boy wasn't meeting the requirements for a solo operation. Suddenly, a dark shadow about half a man's height leaped out and lunged directly toward our hero. Just as a claw as sharp as a halberd was about to pierce his chest, he took a swift, decisive step. He leaped high into the air, gripping his demon-hunting dagger tightly as his body began to fall. He aimed the blade to stab directly into the head of the creature. However, just as he was about to succeed, a sickening cracking sound echoed through the air. The head of this deity suddenly twisted a full 180 degrees, a truly unsettling sight. He even caught a glimpse of a strange, demonic smile reflected in the creature's two disgusting features. Looking into those round, insect-like eyes, he realized he had no choice but to abandon his attack. Instead, he kicked off the creature's shell and leaped away once more. As he jumped, two long black lotuses suddenly sprouted from the creature's dark, round eyes. They grazed the shield of his mask, and after missing their mark, the beast tried to retract them. He seized the opening, driving his weapon into the creature's head through its very nostrils. He collapsed onto the shell of the fallen deity, taking a moment to adjust his breathing. With a divine corpse this large, he knew that if he ate it all, his power would truly soar. It was time to get to work, so he cut into the calf joint of the Yin Shiyin, emptied the meat from inside, and fashioned a straw. He inserted it into the body of the fallen creature and began to frantically suck out the green juices contained within. He continued this way, drinking deeply for about a minute without stopping even once. Eventually, the juices ran dry. He let out a satisfied burp and wiped the residue from the corner of his mouth. After that, he closed his gas mask and leaned back lazily against the shell of the high alien. Lee Tianmin, watching from not too far away, had absolutely no idea what Xian had just done. Suddenly, the man felt a strange sense of nostalgia. The boy seemed to be having quite a lot of fun on his own. After resting for a short while, we suddenly hear the distant sounds of a slaughter taking place. It seemed that another insect-slaying squad was approaching the area. A few hours later, we see him observing a ground littered with the corpses of fallen deities. He wiped away the last of the juice hanging from the corner of his mouth, looking quite content. At that very moment, the sequence information within his brain began to shift and change. The God Devourer sequence was ascending to a new height. His current sequence level reached the third stage, the Brave Knight. He gained a new skill, the Dual Badge, which permanently increases the user's total strength after killing a deity. It offered a staggering 100% increase, though the skill carried a cooldown time of 1 year. He realized that if he used his violent skill, his current strength would already be 3 times higher than normal. If he then activated the dual badge, wouldn't his power increase 6-fold all at once? The thought was staggering. He knew that the sooner he used it, the sooner it would recharge for the future. Without hesitation, he immediately activated his violent skill and followed it by triggering the dual badge. After setting his sights on a long-whiskered worm, he brought his foot down, fueled by his new sequence level and the blessing of his violent skill. This single stomp instantly carved a hole into the ground, half a palm deep. The long-whiskered worm didn't even have time to struggle before meeting its end. It passed away without any pain, and immediately after, he felt a surge of power flooding his entire body. With every attribute enhanced, he stepped on a nearby long-legged worm, and this time his calf sank halfway into the earth. After stowing the last of the loot into his bulging backpack, he called out to Li Tianmin. It was time to head to the safe zone, and after waiting for over 40 minutes at the exit, his turn finally arrived. When he pulled the zipper open, everyone standing nearby widened their eyes and held their breath in shock. With a loud crash, the original armor plates spilled eagerly out of the backpack. As they scattered across the floor, he offered a faint, knowing smile. He told them to please maintain their professional attitude and continue with the inspection. A strange, heavy silence suddenly fell over the entire area. It took a moment, but eventually, someone in the crowd managed to react. Every single one of the original armor plates before them had come from the hands of this young man, Cian. It seemed impossible that one person could possess so many original armor plates. They argued that not even he and the person beside him working together could have gathered such a haul. Several onlookers, who were far from humble to begin with, were now turning red with pure indignation. They began kicking and shouting incessantly, looking as if they wanted to swallow Cian alive. Even the inspection staff from the administration could hardly believe what their eyes were seeing. They had never been asked such a thing before. How exactly did he obtain so many original armor plates? The inspection officer's tone was cold and sharp, as if he were interrogating a common criminal. Cian responded calmly, asking if the administration had a rule requiring him to explain his methods. As he spoke of hunting gods, the inspector's expression became visibly sour and unpleasant. But, with no other choice, the man had to proceed with the inspection according to the regulations. The entire process dragged on for over 2 hours until, finally, the staff announced the results. For Cian's god hunting rewards, the total came to 800 god hunting points. Since he was operating as a one-man team, the points were doubled, giving him a total of 1,600. This included 800,000 tanvi and 80 flat sequence patterns. Because the reward was so substantial, it couldn't be handled right there on the spot. He was told he would need to collect it at the nearby administrative office. Hearing this, a small, satisfied smile nearly broke across his face. 800,000 tanvi. That was an incredible sum, far more than he had ever expected. He had suddenly become a wealthy man, but as he turned to leave with his empty backpack, a voice called out. Wait, he looked back and saw it was one of the men who had been questioning him earlier. When asked what he wanted, the man boldly challenged Cian to a duel in the combat arena. He proposed a bet using the sequence numbers 3, 8, 3, 2, and 4. Cian was a bit dazed, hearing about the privilege of leaving the safe zone. He turned to Li Tianmin, who was just as confused, and asked what this privilege actually was. It turned out to be a reward for the top 5 individuals with the most accumulated points from this excursion. They held the privilege of leaving the safe zone, and he was a bit dazed to learn he'd also received 10% more rewards. What nonsense is this? Why on earth should I place a bet with you? He was just about to leave, but the man stepped forward and stopped him once again. I just checked your records, the man said, and you belong to the Phantom Assassin sequence. If I lose, I will give you a God Hunter weapon as my part of the wager. Cian was on the verge of refusing the offer when Li Tianmin suddenly stopped him. This is actually a good opportunity, his companion urged. You should accept his challenge. God Hunter weapons are forged by sequence ability users, making them incredibly rare. They can't be bought with money, but even so, he couldn't risk exposing his sequence deception for a mere weapon. He was about to say no once more, but then Li Tianmin leaned in and whispered, You have nothing to worry about, as there are no spectators allowed inside the battle ring. It will be just the two of you in there, and no one will ever know what truly happened. Cian asked in a low voice if there would be any trouble if he happened to kill the man. Not at all. In the battle ring, every fighter is responsible for their own life and death. His eyes lit up at that. If killing was permitted, then the situation had changed completely. Now he was actually feeling enthusiastic, and so, after signing the liability waiver, he eagerly stepped into the enclosed dueling ring to face his opponent. The man let out a hurl and followed him inside. The door slammed shut, sealing the arena. Watching the closed door, one of the onlookers laughed, certain that the boy was absolutely doomed. John and the boy shared the same assassin sequence, but John's sequence level was already at level 2. It's easy enough to kill him, one man remarked, before telling Li Tianmin that he was certainly an optimist. Are you ready to watch that boy get sent straight to the hospital? He asked with a smirk. Li Tianmin simply looked at the man with a glint of malicious joy in his eyes and said nothing at all. To the hospital? Well, that wouldn't be nearly as much trouble as what's actually coming. We can send him directly to his funeral instead. Inside the ring, as the door clicked shut, John immediately drew a scimitar from his waist. He activated his assassin skill and swung the blade toward Cian's back, a classic move, really. You must pay for your ignorance and your recklessness, you little insect, he hissed. John was already imagining exactly how he would torture Cian once the boy was at his mercy. In his mind, the price for such arrogance had to be paid in full. Yes, John had already planned out every agonizing detail of the torture he intended to inflict later. However, just as he thought he had landed a critical blow, Cian suddenly vanished from right in front of him. How is this possible? Just as John's vision blurred with a golden light, the boy had already appeared at his side. Cian's raw strength already far exceeded that of average sequence users, especially with a dual metal that quadrupled his attributes. With 12 times his normal strength and agility active, John found himself completely unable to mount a defense. John's body simply couldn't keep up with Insean's blindingly fast movements. Through his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of Insean's crazed, terrifying smile in that moment. It was then that he realized, far too late, that Insean wasn't a simple assassin at all. Deep down, he knew Insean's sequence level was significantly higher than anything his own body could handle. Realizing the danger, he immediately reached out to press the surrender button on his bracelet. But Insean wasn't about to give him that chance, and we see his fist rise high, ready to strike. Leaning into John's ear, he softly whispered a word of thanks before delivering a devastating punch. The blow landed squarely on the side of John's face with brutal precision. Before John even had time to register the pain, he felt his entire vision flatten in an instant. Then, everything went dark. John simply stopped thinking altogether. We see the door to the battle arena slowly creak open once again. The onlookers were more than a little surprised by the sudden movement. Only a few minutes had passed. After all, the matter had been settled far too quickly. They wondered if John had already defeated the boy, especially since he'd promised a long, slow torture. How could it be over in a single minute? If they'd known it would be this brief, they wouldn't have come. It was all quite boring, until, that is, they realized something was very wrong. One by one, they began to look in the direction the man was pointing. In an instant, every eye in the room widened in complete disbelief. Under their shocked gazes, Insean stepped through the door, drenched in blood. He was still clutching that dull, unassuming knife in his hand. The following morning, he arrived at the classroom and took his usual seat. Not long after, two familiar figures appeared right in front of him. He looked up to find Lu Ruyan and Zhou Yan standing there. Lu Ruyan nervously tugged at Zhou Yan's arm, her eyes still clouded with lingering fear. Zhou Yan, however, took a different approach, mentioning that his uncle was a high-level sequence user. He asked if Insean could, for his sake, simply forget whatever had happened with Ruyan before. He looked at Lu Ruyan with pure disdain, wondering if this was truly the best helper she could find. Lu Ruyan swallowed hard, admitting to Insean that she truly knew she had made a mistake. He turned his gaze back to Zhou Yan, who seemed to be echoing that same sentiment of regret. The apologies kept coming as Zhou Yan questioned what kind of grudge could possibly exist between them. Zhou Yan straightened his posture, insisting that the nature of the grudge didn't actually matter. After all, they were all classmates, so he asked if Insean could simply do him a favor and let her go. Insean wondered where he got the nerve, asking if his useless uncle was the one who told him to speak this way. He pulled out his phone and tossed it over to Zhou Yan without a second thought. He assumed the boy remembered his own uncle's number, of course. He told him to call his uncle immediately, or he'd end up being slapped just like the school's dean. He wasn't joking, and Zhou Yan, remembering the dean currently rotting in a hospital bed, knew it. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he quickly began to dial his uncle's number. The moment the call connected, Insean reached out and snatched the phone right out of his hand. He greeted the man on the other end, Zhou Shu-chan, identifying himself as Insean. Upon hearing that name, Zhou Xian, on the other end of the line, immediately broke into a smile. He sounded delighted, mentioning he had been planning to reach out to student Ian himself. It was quite the coincidence, he noted, before asking if there was anything he could do to help. Insean kept it simple, explaining that Zhou Yan was currently trying to protect one of his enemies. He asked for the man's thoughts on the matter, to which Zhou Xian replied that he understood perfectly. And then, he calmly requested that the phone be handed back to Zhou Yan. Zhou Yan took the phone, his eyes fixed nervously on Insean. "Uncle, don't listen to him. He's just talking nonsense," he stammered into the receiver. He insisted they were all just classmates playing around and that there was no real hatred between them at all. However, a cold, uncompromising voice drifted back from the other end of the line. The order was clear. He was to break off all ties with that person, as Insean had been wronged. His uncle warned that if Insean didn't forgive him, the family would cut him off entirely. We see Zhou Yan listen in stunned silence, finally asking if he understood the gravity of the situation. Zhou Xian's undeniable support for Insean turned the boy pale, leaving him with no choice but to nod in agreement. He muttered a quiet, "Yes, uncle, I understand," before handing the phone back to Insean. His eyes, however, were still brimming with a mix of deep resentment and complete confusion. Insean took the phone back and greeted the man, saying, "Hello, Boss Zhou." He offered his thanks, and the moment Zhou Xian heard his voice, his enthusiasm returned instantly. He warmly suggested that whenever student Ian was free, they should definitely grab a meal together. Insean agreed, noting that since the boss was so interested in dining, he was naturally willing to join him. After telling him to pick a time and place, he hung up and turned his gaze back to Zhou Yan and Lu Ruyan. He asked Zhou Yan if he had anything else to say, prompting the boy to immediately bow before him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, admitting that what he had done before was completely wrong. He promised then and there that he would no longer interfere in the matter between Insean and Lu Ruyan. Hearing that her protector was abandoning her, Lu Ruyan grabbed Zhou Yan's arm in a state of pure panic. She wanted to hold on to him, but Zhou Yan, weighed down by his own guilt, didn't dare look her in the eye. He shook off her hand and walked out of the classroom, while Insean watched the scene unfold with a certain amused interest. Lu Ruyan, congratulations, he said, suggesting she should try to find someone a bit more intelligent next time. He advised her to enjoy these last few moments of peace, which, to be honest, sounded more like a promise than a suggestion. As Lu Ruyan listened, her face turned as pale as the wall, drained of every last bit of vitality. We see her realize that Insean is a sequence ability user, a fact that changed everything. An orphan since childhood, he seemed to have no obvious weaknesses to exploit. But then she paused. While he himself had no weaknesses, the people around him certainly did. Insean seemed to have a good relationship with the old woman at the library, she noted. And then there was Shu. It had to be that way, she reasoned. Thinking of this, Lu Ruyan's eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate spark. If she could just control those two people, she might finally be able to force Insean to back down. We return to the present where, after class, Insean made his way back to the principal's office. Just as he was reviewing the files as usual, there was a sudden, sharp knock at the office door. When the door opened, an old man with hair as white as snow stepped inside. Insean, you are very good, the man said, admitting that he had been completely fooled. Insean looked at Olaf in silence, offering no response to the accusation. The old man noted that he had worked in the police department for 40 years. In all that time, he had only been deceived 5 times in total. You are the youngest, Olaf continued, recalling the last time he saw him in the internet cafe warehouse. He truly thought he was just a poor, miserable boy, tricked by some wealthy brat, which tells you everything about how well Insean hides his true self. He spoke of Wandefa, admitting he never imagined a 17-year-old high schooler could pull the strings of a local thug like him. Olaf sighed to himself, while Insean remained as silent as ever upon learning the detective knew he was a sequence ability user. The old man noted that any justification was in vain, as he had seen Insean's information while browsing the ability user database. He had been quite surprised, which is why he had rushed to the internet cafe as quickly as possible. He had questioned Wandefa about the boy, and he invited Insean to guess exactly what the thug had said. Detective Olaf, is this really what you came to ask me today? Insean replied, maintaining his calm facade. He stated quite clearly that he didn't believe any of this had anything to do with him. Olaf simply smiled, knowing full well that Wandefa wouldn't say a word, which, to be honest, was exactly what he expected. Detective Olaf, I am just a student, Insean insisted, trying to play the part of the innocent youth. He claimed the detective's questions were far too deep for someone like him to understand. Olaf ignored the deflection, asking who else besides Wandefa knew that Insean had been at the internet cafe. Only Ladatsi knew, and Olaf suddenly dropped a bombshell. He asked if Insean was the one who had killed him. The boy refused to speak, leaving the detective to admit he truly didn't know what to do with him. Insean maintained his outward composure, though deep down, he was beginning to feel a flicker of unease. He hadn't expected Olaf to connect Ladatsi's death to him so directly, and yet, there was more. The detective pointed out that he had a perfect alibi, having personally reviewed the school's recordings from that morning. Right after Ladatsi's death, Insean had arrived at school in less than 10 minutes, a feat that seemed physically impossible. Insean argued that this meant he couldn't be the killer, but a sharp, cunning look flashed in Olaf's eyes. Olaf countered that a normal student should have asked who Ladatsi even was, forcing Insean to brace himself for the pressure. After all, if he knew a man like Wandefa, there was no way he wouldn't know who Ladatsi was, which was a very fair point. Olaf slightly clenched his fist, noting that Insean was incredibly cautious, a natural-born criminal in his eyes. He pointed out that, as he had mentioned before, the boy simply hadn't had enough time to commit the crime. That was, of course, assuming that he hadn't yet awakened his sequence abilities on that particular day. Insean replied casually, admitting that he actually had awakened his sequence abilities just this past weekend. Olaf countered that he could easily pretend it happened then, while in reality, he'd been using those powers for some time. The boy merely shrugged, telling Inspector Olaf that his assumptions were certainly very interesting. But then he asked how one could possibly prove it, which caused Olaf to let out a heavy sigh. The detective repeated that Insean was far too cautious for his own good. He noted that Ladatsi's body had been burned so badly that his brain was nothing more than a cooked mass. Because of that, the unique ability of the undead sequence user, Wang Zhao, simply wouldn't work on him. Insean spoke seriously once more, reminding the inspector that everything he said was mere guesswork without a shred of evidence. He politely asked him to stop saying he had burned the body, as he maintained he had done no such thing. Olaf smiled nonchalantly, agreeing to listen, though we can tell he wasn't entirely convinced. He then brought up how Yuan and Skull had been shattered, leaving his brain scattered across the combat ring. In the same way, it was impossible for them to read his memories from the moments before his death. Insean claimed that killing Yuan had been nothing more than a temporary loss of control. He offered his apologies, insisting that he truly knew nothing about the other matters the inspector was discussing. Olaf pulled out a cigar and lit it himself, the smoke curling around them as the tension thickened. He then asked if Insean knew that just a few days before Ladatsi's death, something else had happened. 2 stations away from the exit of Safe Zone 54320, they had discovered 3 charred bodies. Upon hearing this, Inseen felt himself tremble uncontrollably, though he tried his best to hide it. He certainly hadn't expected Olaf to connect this particular matter to the rest of the investigation. Olaf held his cigar with a faint, knowing smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He continued calmly, noting that those 3 people hadn't just had their heads shattered, but were burned as well. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Inseen tried to stay calm, but beads of sweat instinctively began to form on his brow. He could only rely on silence to maintain his composure, waiting to see what would come next. Then, Olaf uttered the one sentence the boy truly did not want to hear regarding this murder case. It occurred in a dumpster near the exit of Safe Zone 54320, right after the strange disappearance of the divine remains. He then asked our young Inseen if he thought there might be some sort of connection between the 2 events. Forcing his body to stop shaking, he slowly opened his mouth to remind the detective that he had no evidence. He told Inspector Olaf quite plainly that everything he was saying was nothing more than mere guesswork. Olaf conceded that he was right. He did lack evidence, but then he added a rather chilling but. He asked the boy if he honestly thought he cared about those people in and of themselves. Olaf shook his head and smiled, making it clear that the life and death of the victims meant little to him. The fate of Ladotzi, as well as the fate of the others who had crossed paths with the boy, was irrelevant. To be perfectly honest, the lives of Ladotzi and those 3 anonymous corpses didn't matter to him at all. How they died and what they experienced in their final moments simply wasn't important to the inspector. What had always interested him was only one thing: the fact that Inseen had stolen the divine remains. Where he had hidden them and what he had done with them was what truly captured his curiosity. And so, he asked Inseen once more if he could finally answer that one simple question for him. Inseen simply replied that he was very sorry, but he still didn't understand what Inspector Olaf was talking about, and he certainly wasn't panicking. Instead, he managed to smile, thinking that since the man had guessed everything, perhaps killing him was the only way out. He felt that by removing Olaf, he could resolve everything, which, to be honest, was a rather drastic solution. Olaf then asked him if he had ever truly considered the fact that he simply cannot escape this situation. He stated he was 90% sure that Inseen's sequence was definitely not that of a mere assassin. The inspector admitted he didn't know what method the boy had used to forge his sequence profile. He noted that if he wanted to expose him, he only had to take him to the administration to test his actual sequence abilities. Upon hearing this, our young protagonist was a bit surprised, finding the suggestion somewhat hard to believe. He looked at Olaf and asked a rhetorical question regarding the sequence of a person with such abilities. It had already been measured by the administration, and we know it wouldn't be verified again unless that person was a suspect. Unless he had been formally convicted, Olaf couldn't possibly be unaware of these regulations. It was strange, like a rat catching the scent of cheese. He stroked the armrest of his seat, lost in deep thought. He then told Inspector Olaf that he had just thought of a question he needed to verify with him. He pointed out that while there are several large safe zones, it seems these zones don't actually communicate with each other, do they? He even suggested that the network they use normally is just a local network within the safe zone, which is a fair point, really. Olaf didn't quite understand why Inseen would ask this, but he nodded in agreement anyway. He confirmed that the boy was right, as there are countless divine allies between the main safe zones. It is virtually impossible for manpower to pass through and establish a stable network connection between them. As for the United Government, an old man from the police station like Olaf had no idea how they communicated between zones. Inseen nodded his head, telling Inspector Olaf that he was merely consulting him about a specific problem. "Where do you come from?" As Inseen asked this, Olaf's smile remained fixed on his face. However, the depth of the river and the sea within his eyes seemed to dim just a little. Inseen pressed on, asking Inspector Olaf exactly what he meant by his previous statements. To be more precise, he wanted to know what it meant for a safe zone to come from an unknown place. He suggested that, in any case, Olaf didn't actually belong to this safe zone, did he? In fact, he noted that perhaps he shouldn't even be calling him Inspector Olaf at all. After all, the real Inspector Olaf had never once set foot outside of our safe zone. Olaf's smile finally vanished as he told his young companion that his story was getting a bit far-fetched. Inseen simply asked if he really thought so, before offering to tell the inspector another story. He recalled that 3 years ago, there had been a massive protest by sequence wielders in this very zone. The reason for the unrest was that the United Government had begun treating wielders like a mere collection of data. The testing had become far too frequent for anyone's liking, which is understandable, really. They were constantly monitoring sequence levels and specific sequence abilities. Everything had to be verified and tested one by one, leaving no room for privacy. Naturally, this caused a great deal of anxiety and resentment among the sequence wielders. And so, organized by a few key individuals, a large-scale protest finally broke out. Since then, the government stipulated that a wielder's abilities would only be tested once. Unless a person had already been formally convicted, a second test would never be performed. He asked Olaf what he thought of that. The man's pupils contracted, and his gaze turned sharp and alert. If Olaf was truly a veteran of this zone who participated in that protest, how could he possibly not know that? The United Government had corrected the test. We see Ian tapping his knuckles lightly on the desk, resting his cheek on one hand. He looked at the man and asked, quite simply, where the inspector actually came from. And more importantly, he wanted to know where the real Inspector Olaf was currently buried. Olaf took a deep breath and told Ian that he really ought to understand the situation. He explained that he hadn't reported him directly, choosing instead to speak with him, as he had no ill intentions. Ian countered by saying the inspector should know that he wasn't exactly posting his thoughts on the public forum either. He was simply doing the same thing, talking face to face, and he, too, claimed to have no bad intentions. Olaf shook his head, suggesting that Ian's sequence might be humanity's only hope against the gods, and urged him to cooperate. But cooperate with what, exactly? Human experiments? Biopsies? To be honest, neither sounded particularly appealing. He offered a contemptuous smile, telling the man not to bother talking about the hope of humanity, especially since there was a time when he himself had no hope of even surviving. No one had come to save him then, so he asked the inspector what he was really trying to say. Olaf realized the boy didn't want to believe him, so he decided it was best not to say much more. He promised not to impose his own thoughts or desires on the young man, which was a small comfort, at least. He told him he would understand in time, before wrapping his scarf back around his neck to prepare for his departure. Ian finally got up from the sofa and, after seeing Olaf out, let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. He felt as though he had narrowly escaped being dragged off by the old man to be dissected like a lab rat. It was a lucky escape. If his suspicions were correct, then Olaf was definitely something more than he appeared. The idea of people coming from other safe zones was certainly not something he felt comfortable with. It seemed unlikely that an ordinary sequence could achieve this, suggesting there was something much larger moving behind the scenes. There is a powerful organization at work here. After leaving school, Ian took the bus straight to the education office. He used a bit of force to demand that Zuzan secure a special university recommendation for him. Zuzan was obviously not very pleased, but Ian's harsh attitude prevented him from trying to negotiate a higher price. He had no choice but to accept the deal. Shortly after Ian left, a middle-aged man with a face full of pustules appeared. He knocked on the door of Zuzan's office, calling out to him by name. He apologized immediately, worried that he was interrupting the man's important work. As it turned out, Zuzan didn't feel much sympathy for his older brother, Sauz. When asked what was wrong, Sauz explained that after that little beast Zoyin returned home, he told him what happened in class. He claimed he got so angry that he gave the boy a beating, which is why he brought him along to apologize. He barked at the boy, calling him a little beast and telling him to get in there and apologize to his uncle. When Zoyin finally entered, we see his cheeks were swollen and his eyes were bloodshot from crying bitterly. The boy managed a quiet apology, while Zuzan simply turned his head away, unimpressed. He told the boy that if he hadn't spoken up, he wouldn't have been able to get him justice, or so he claimed. After listening, Zoza asked tentatively if Ian wasn't really just an ordinary student. He wondered how he could possibly kill someone, suggesting Zoyin was only disobedient because he'd been spoiled. Zuzan pointed coldly at Zoza, warning them both that Ian was not someone they should ever provoke. He noted that since Ian had a deadly feud with that girl, she likely wouldn't be living much longer. He warned them that if they caused trouble again and lost their lives, they shouldn't expect any help from him. If anyone were to ask them about Ian, there was to be only one answer. They knew absolutely nothing. The boy tried to protest, reminding his uncle that Ian was his classmate, but the matter was clearly settled. The boy argued that if he claimed not to know anything, no one would believe him. "Are you stupid?" his uncle snapped, telling him to simply say he didn't remember. He insisted that if things weren't clear, there was no way for anyone else to investigate further. It didn't matter if they believed him or not. The most important thing, naturally, was staying alive. After Zoza left with Zoyen, he scolded the boy severely on the way home, telling him to listen to his uncle. He warned him never to provoke Ian again, demanding to know if he understood. He told the boy to go home and eat while he went to the hospital to care for his mother. Apparently, someone had paid more for surgery, so the hospital had bumped their mother's procedure for someone else. He had to go see what was happening, leaving Zoyen to return home feeling utterly dejected. Deep down, he didn't really believe Zuzan's warnings, feeling that his uncle was just being dramatic. But reality, as it often does, would soon prove that Zuzan's words were far from groundless. We returned to the school the next morning, where 2 police cars were already parked at the entrance. Zoyen felt his heart skip a beat at the sight of the flashing lights. An inexplicable emptiness washed over him as he walked past a man he recognized from the hospital. But as he passed by, he overheard a few words that caused the blood to freeze in his veins. Lu Ruyan had disappeared, and he couldn't help but wonder if Ian had actually killed her. At that thought, every hair on Zoyen's body stood on end. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, a physical reaction to the growing dread. Just then, Olaf approached him, asking if he was all right. Zoyen could only stare blankly at Olaf before slowly shaking his head. "We want to know more about Lu Ruyan," the man said, his voice carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "I heard that you and she were dating, but I really don't know," he continued, probing for a reaction. I don't know anything," Zoyen replied, shaking his head with a haste that bordered on panic. He pleaded with them not to ask him anything else, claiming, quite unconvincingly, that he couldn't remember a single thing. Olaf frowned, noting that Zoyan's state of mind obviously meant he knew far more than he was letting on. We must remember that Lu Ruyan was a classmate of Insean, a detail that was becoming increasingly relevant. Intuition told Olaf that this entire matter was now inseparably linked to Insean. At that very moment, Insean was catching up on some sleep inside the principal's office. He was awakened by a knock at the door, only to find an elder relative of Zoyan standing there when he opened it. Olaf let out a long sigh, wondering if they were really destined to keep meeting like this. "Are you treating our school like a branch of the police station now?" he asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. The man had been coming by every single day, and to be honest, Olaf was starting to mind quite a bit. Ignoring Insean's lack of a welcome, the man simply stepped aside, entered the office, and made himself comfortable on a sofa. "I came today because I want to know about other things," the visitor stated, getting straight to the point. Insean looked at him with clear disgust, asking what could possibly be the problem this time. "Lu Ruyan disappeared last night," the man revealed, watching for a reaction. "Did you know about that?" Upon hearing that Lu Ruyan had vanished, Insean's brow furrowed in genuine thought. Olaf sighed again, mentioning he'd heard that after 40 years, Zoyan was no longer in the office either. With Zoyan missing as well, he wondered if the police station would even bother to accept the case. "I know the rules of the police station better than you do," the man replied, his tone sharp and final. There was no need for Insean to get upset, or so the man claimed. "I only want to ask, where were you last night between 7 and 7:30? Insean replied that he was at the education office, noting that the head of the office, Zo Xin, admired him. Apparently, the official wanted to give him the special admission spot he held in his hands. "We should note that the education office is about 10 bus stops away from the school. How could Lu Ruyan's disappearance possibly be related to me?" he asked. He wondered aloud if the man suspected him of having the ability to clone himself. A cloning sequence. One has to wonder if such a sequence even exists in this world. "Do you know how we discovered that Lu Ruyan disappeared?" the visitor questioned. Insean didn't know, nor did he want to know, especially considering the history of Lu Ruyan's family. Last night at 7:30, a massive fire broke out, claiming the lives of her entire family. Only her body was missing. After Olaf finished speaking, he watched Insean's reaction very closely. From his expression, it truly seemed as though he had no idea the entire family had perished. But Olaf already knew Insean's background and no longer treated him like an ordinary student. So, even if Insean's reaction was flawless, Olaf remained deeply suspicious. He suspected a killer was at work, using the brutal method of murdering and then burning the bodies. Does that sound familiar? He nodded to himself. It was indeed a familiar pattern. To be honest with Olaf, the two cases they had discussed the day before shared a striking commonality. "That's right, that's how I see it. In my opinion, these 3 cases must have been committed by the same person." He nodded in approval, certain that they were finally looking at the same dark truth. "You committed the first 2 crimes. We both know that implicitly, so let's talk about this time. How exactly did you kill Lu Ruyan's entire family and then make her disappear?" Olaf asked directly, but Insean simply told him he was missing the point entirely. What he meant was that it was physically impossible for him to have killed Lu Ruyan's family. In this particular case, he happened to have a rock-solid alibi. The murder of Lu Ruyan's family and her subsequent disappearance had absolutely nothing to do with him. And since Olaf insisted the 3 cases were committed by a single person, it stood to reason that the other 2 cases had nothing to do with him either. "I am innocent," he stated, though Olaf told him there was no point in talking like that. Olaf claimed he wasn't there to judge, but rather that he had come to help him. Insean thanked him for the kindness, but insisted he was fine and didn't need any help. He suggested that if Olaf had so much energy, he should help the orphans wandering near the safe zone. Olaf noted that Insean was also a wandering orphan, but he wouldn't push the matter further. By the way, Insean wanted to know, was Lu Ruyan's family burned alive? Or were they murdered first, with the bodies burned only afterward to hide the evidence? Olaf replied that it wasn't appropriate to reveal such specific details of the case. Insean simply shrugged, saying that was fine and that he hoped they solved the case soon. Without any real progress, Olaf failed to get a single piece of useful information out of him. The biggest problem was that he couldn't explain how Insean could kill from such a distance. And yet, everything indicated that Insean and Lu Ruyan's disappearance must be connected. We find Olaf at a complete dead end, with nowhere left to turn in his investigation. He was already wondering if Insean's sequence was somehow related to scheduled murders or perhaps even body doubles. Once Olaf had gone, Insean leaned back in his armchair to try and organize his thoughts. The only person who truly had a grudge against Lu Ruyan was Insean himself, after all. At first, he assumed it was just a minor rivalry, but it seemed he was mistaken. Deep down, he felt a growing sense of unease. If he hadn't done it, who else would want them dead? Suddenly, an image flashed through his mind, clear as day. He pictured a beautiful girl with long hair and large, striking eyes. The memory of her sweet smile gave him a sudden, sharp chill, and not the pleasant kind. As if he'd received a literal electric shock, he sat bolt upright in his chair. He headed straight for the library, where he found Wen Shu still alone, quietly working through her problems. He had something to ask her, but before he could, she confessed that she was the one who did it. When Shu answered him directly, her gaze fixed calmly on the library around them. She explained that since the girl wanted to hurt her, she simply killed her, a logical conclusion in her mind. She asked if there was a problem, and well, he decided there wasn't one. As for the family, they had caused her trouble one by one, so she simply eliminated all of them. Again, she asked if that was a problem, and again, he realized it really wasn't. And that was that, after their brief chat, when Shu went right back to burying her head in her schoolwork. Although he was still burning with curiosity, he decided not to push for more details. After all, he had plenty of his own unspeakable secrets to keep, so who was he to judge? Just as Insean was preparing to head off to class, he suddenly heard the sound of someone crying. We see a young girl sitting at the library entrance, sobbing as she asks a question to anyone nearby. She wanted to know who Brother Insean was, so he approached her and knelt down to her level. He introduced himself as Insean and gently asked the little girl what was wrong. She explained that her grandmother, Zuli, had been attacked while at the hospital. The attackers had stolen her money and sent the girl back on a bus specifically to find him. His expression darkened instantly. He turned to Shu and told her he had to go find Professor Zhu. Since he had to leave immediately, he asked her to handle closing up the library for the day. Upon arriving at the hospital, the sharp, sterile scent of disinfectant hit him full in the face. Following closely behind little Yi Qian, he made his way through the crowded hospital corridors. Soon, we see a man standing amidst a group of doctors and nurses who had gathered in the hallway. Nearby stood several tall, rough-looking men, staring down at Professor Zhu, who was covered in blood. Gritting his teeth, he identified himself as a relative of Yuli and asked them to let him through. The nurse hesitated, seeing that Insean looked like a mere student and fearing he might end up like the old woman. She worried those burly men standing by would beat him half to death without a second thought. So, she kindly advised him that he was very young and shouldn't do anything too impulsive. As she spoke, the nurse gave him a subtle, knowing look, a warning of sorts. She was signaling that the formidable men standing nearby were certainly not people to be trifled with. He gave the nurse a small nod of thanks and assured her that he would be perfectly fine. Noticing that his demeanor was unusually calm for a typical student, the nurse watched him with growing curiosity. One of the men demanded to know who he was, but Insean simply noted that he wasn't like those rowdy, hulking brutes. He calmly stated that he was someone who could kill them all without facing any legal punishment whatsoever. As soon as he uttered those words, a heavy silence fell over the room, and everyone present was left utterly stunned. After all, there is only one type of person in this world who can take a life without being punished. A sequence user. Upon hearing this, the nurse realized he wasn't just some ordinary young man. She understood immediately that she could no longer interfere in what was about to unfold. While little Yi Qian was led away, the burly men nearby exchanged looks of pure, unadulterated terror. They didn't dare to move a muscle as Insean, his face grim, calmly questioned the doctor standing beside him. He wanted to know, quite simply, if there was still a chance the old woman could be saved. Hearing this, the doctors exchanged glances that suggested a recovery was, in fact, technically possible. However, given her advanced age, they warned that even if they saved her, she would likely remain bedridden forever. Furthermore, she was originally scheduled for stomach surgery, and this new injury changed everything. To proceed with the surgery now, in her current state, would almost certainly result in her death. Insean nodded, asking if she would have recovered fully after the surgery had she not been attacked. The doctor confirmed that when she arrived yesterday, all of her medical indicators had been looking very promising. If they had just removed the cancerous tissue as planned, her recovery shouldn't have been difficult at all. Suddenly, one of the thugs pointed at the doctor with wide, bulging eyes, accusing him of talking nonsense. He claimed the doctor had just said the old woman was doomed regardless of whether she had been injured. The doctor looked at the man with visible fear, protesting that he was the one who had forced him to say that. The man's eyes widened even further as he shouted that the doctor was still lying and deserved a thorough beating. The man raised his fist, convinced that his actions were the only way to deal with the doctor. Suddenly, an afterimage appeared right in front of the thug, moving faster than the eye could follow. The man was sent flying like a projectile, crashing through a row of shelves in the hallway. Insean pulled back his fist and, after a quick glance at the fallen man, turned his attention back to Professor Zhu. Everyone present was utterly stunned. They didn't dare to move a muscle or even whisper a word. He didn't bother paying them any mind, simply watching the professor's pained expression as he slowly clenched his fists. He calmly requested that they take the patient to be rescued immediately. Money, he assured them, was not an issue, as he would be the one paying for everything. The doctors, feeling as if they had just been granted a divine amnesty, hurriedly agreed to get to work. As they rushed to help, Insean looked at the remaining thugs, whose faces were pale with nausea and fear. Finally, his gaze settled on a slightly shorter, middle-aged man who seemed to be standing his ground. Although this man was clearly terrified, he still tried to maintain a shred of defiance in front of Insean. It was as if he had something to fall back on, and Insean noted he was different from the others. Insean deduced he must be the one in charge, and the man straightened up despite his nerves. The man stammered that even if he was the leader, Insean shouldn't think he was the only one with powers. He claimed the city was full of hidden masters and that Insean couldn't possibly be the only sequence user. He insisted no one would let a young boy do whatever he pleased, and Insean simply nodded in response. He acknowledged the man's point, noting that this was the only reason he hadn't made a move against him yet. However, since they had hurt the old woman, he made it clear that hiding behind others wouldn't save them. Insean then pulled out his phone and calmly demanded to know the name of the man's benefactor. Whether they lived or died, he explained, depended entirely on whether the name they revealed was significant enough to matter. We see him holding his phone, his gaze fixed coldly on the middle-aged man standing before him. The man didn't possess a desolate vein, yet an ominous premonition of dread began to swell within his chest. He stammered that Insean couldn't kill him, for if he did, he would be hunted down just the same. At that very moment, however, the silence was broken by the sudden ringing of Insean's phone. He answered, asking Section Chief Zhou if something was the matter. Zhou Sin's voice on the other end of the line was clearly brimming with frustration. He reminded his young student that they had agreed to meet at the school that very day. It was about the special admission quota, and Zhou complained that Insean was even changing how he addressed him. Only then did he remember. He had promised Zhou Sin the day before that he would handle the training. He apologized to Uncle Zhou, explaining that he was currently resolving some urgent matters at the hospital. He promised to call back tomorrow, but Zhou was surprised to hear he was at the hospital at all. Zhou wondered if he'd been injured hunting gods, but Insean clarified that a relative had been attacked. He explained he was there to assess the situation, which caused Zhou Sin to let out a short laugh. Suddenly, the middle-aged man cried out, begging for help and claiming his relative was being threatened. He shouted into the air that he was the one treating Zhou's sister-in-law at the hospital. He claimed he had accidentally injured someone and pleaded for Zhou to come and save him quickly. There was a long, heavy silence from Zhou Sin on the other end of the line. Finally, he asked Insean to please hand the phone over to the man who was shouting. Insean warned Chief Zhou that this particular matter wouldn't be as easy to handle as the last one. We see that Insean already has a plan in mind. The man, Zhou Si, took the phone with both hands, his expression visibly nervous. He stammered into the receiver, greeting his brother and reminding him of their conversation from the day before. He claimed he was going to provoke Insean, but Zhou Sin cut him off, asking what on earth he meant by that. Zhou Sin asked if he was trying to annoy him, wondering if he hadn't heard a word of the scolding he gave Zhou Yan. The man defended himself, claiming he had no idea that the old woman was actually a relative of Insean. He argued that he was told she was an orphan, questioning how she could have possibly secured a spot in the queue. He assumed that if she wasn't an orphan, then someone must have paid a fortune just to help her cut the line. Zhou Sin's voice grew colder as he told his brother that, of course, he couldn't be happy about this situation. He reminded him that the little money he made from managing the queue was only thanks to their family connection. And yet, here he was, being demanding and actively preventing the hospital from making its legitimate profit. Zhou Sin asked who gave him such courage, noting that not even the hospital director or the area chief would dare offend him. Insean snatched the phone back, explaining that while the old woman could have recovered after surgery, she was now on the verge of death. Zhou Sin fell silent once more before admitting, with some hesitation, that the man was indeed his brother. Insean asked if he was also the father of Zhou Yan, his classmate. He wasn't sure if it would change anything, but he confirmed that the man was indeed Zhou Yan's father. Insean asked what that had to do with him, wondering if Zhou Sin truly believed he and Zhou Yan had a good relationship. Zhou Sin sighed and asked what conditions Insean would set if he wanted to save his brother's life. Insean simply said goodbye and hung up the phone, ending the conversation abruptly. Looking at the pale face of Zhou Si, he remarked that his brother didn't seem to be very helpful after all. He then asked if, besides Zhou Sin, the man had any other sponsors he was relying on. If you have any, speak up. Quickly, he headed to the bathroom to wash the blood from his hands. After that, he pulled out his phone and dialed the sequence administration, greeting them calmly. He simply said, "Hello, look, I've just killed a few people." He wanted to confess. Right then, two people dressed in formal attire approached him. We see they were a bit surprised, as if they hadn't expected someone who killed so many to be a teenager. They told him he had killed 7 people, which was considered a very serious security incident. As punishment, he was told he must obtain 14 God Hunt points within 6 months. While he was earning those points, he could only receive rewards from sequence modules. He wouldn't be able to enjoy any other rewards. They asked if he understood. "Yes, I understand," he replied. He didn't want to cause trouble for anyone else. One of the administration members spoke to him with great seriousness. He noted that Insean knew he caused trouble, so he should restrain himself in the future and not be so impulsive. He reminded him that although sequence ability users are different from ordinary people, they still come from them. Because of that, they must still maintain a certain level of respect for life. Later, he found the doctor and asked respectfully if the patient truly had no hope of salvation. The doctor sighed and said he was very sorry, but they had already done everything they could. However, he mentioned that if the director were willing to act, there might be more opportunities, as the director is like him. It turns out the director is also a sequence ability user, and his specific ability is that of a healer. Upon hearing this, Insean immediately felt a flicker of hope return to him. He asked how to contact the director, but the doctor noted that he hadn't performed surgery in a very long time. We learned that even when the director of the sequence administration came to the hospital for medical care, he simply sent the director to hospitals in other areas, refusing to intervene personally. Not even for the director of the administration? To be honest, that sounded quite discouraging. After hearing this, the flicker of hope that had just emerged in Insean was shattered once again. Just at that moment, the doctor's phone rang, and we see him answer with a quick hello. He confirmed it was the director, noting that the person in question was right beside him. The doctor looked at him with some surprise, explaining that the director had summoned him to his office. Insean was also a bit surprised, wondering what on earth this director could have seen in him. Why was he looking for him? He wondered if, like Olaf, this man also knew his secret. He questioned if the director and Olaf were partners as he took the elevator to the 5th floor. We see that this entire floor was dedicated to the director's private offices. A voice asked if it was Insean, inviting him to step into the inner room. The voice reminded him of a mature, warm woman, and he calmly agreed to enter. And so, our protagonist walked toward the inner room to meet this mysterious figure. Upon opening the door, he saw a long-haired beauty waiting for him inside. She was sitting in front of a computer, typing away at something in secret. The director adjusted her fine-rimmed glasses, observing him with a calculated gaze. She noted that if he was willing to be his guarantor, their relationship must be very intimate. She decided not to commit fully, so she wouldn't have to reject Skimfingel's request later. She then instructed him to use his phone to call Skimfingel directly. He dialed Lishenmin's number and then handed the phone over to Skimfingel. On the other end of the line, we hear Lishenmin panting heavily. He demanded to know what was wanted, claiming he was busy and needed to talk fast. But suddenly, Skimfingel's eyes turned a deep, painful red. She called Lishenmin a piece of scum, leaving him completely stunned on the other end. He didn't respond and simply hung up, which prompted an angry Skimfingel to throw the phone to the floor. Insean rushed to pick up the device to check for any damage. Fortunately, there were only a few light scratches on the back. The camera and screen were fine, while Skimfingel wiped her face, drying the tears from the corners of her eyes. She told Insean that she had one condition for curing the old woman. If he could fulfill it, she would perform the operation right then and there. She wanted to meet Lishenmin at the Hanjun restaurant, a specific request from Skimfingel. She asked for help getting him there, which caused Insean to make a troubled face. At first, he had thought that Skimfingel had taken a personal interest in him. He figured it wouldn't be so bad if it meant he could save Zalaoshi. It wasn't an unacceptable trade, but he certainly hadn't expected this turn of events. To help Skimfingel, he dialed Lishenmin's number once again. He explained that Skimfingel wanted dinner, and if he didn't accept, Zalaoshi wouldn't be saved. Zalaoshi was badly wounded, and without her intervention, he could die at any moment. He asked for a favor, to just have dinner with her, which, to be honest, seemed like a small price to pay. I have no relationship with Zulajin, Lishenmin replied coldly. If he dies, let him die. Insean countered calmly, noting that while Lishenmin felt nothing, he himself was deeply connected to the man. Lishenmin scoffed, wondering what possible connection an orphan like Insean could have with an ordinary person. He warned Insean not to take advantage of his good nature or push his luck too far. He even reminded him, calling him loudly, that he hadn't yet settled the debt for making that first phone call. Insean explained that while Master Zhu was indeed an ordinary man, he had provided exactly what was needed before Insean's abilities awakened. To him, training a skill user wasn't just a job, it was a debt of gratitude he couldn't ignore. It all came down to 10 coins a week, a small favor that meant everything at the time. He admitted to Lowly that he still owed a few coins, not even enough to cover the cost of a surgery. He pointed out that Lishenmin's view was wrong, as Master Zhu had initially refused any reward for his help. While other parents offered bribes, Master Zhu had simply insisted on giving Insean a chance to prove himself. Without those 10 coins of support each week, he might have ended up as just another forgotten student on break. Now that he finally had the power to help Zalaoshi, he felt he absolutely had to save him. He asked Lowly to consider the future and what might happen if he ever found himself in trouble. He suggested that when the time came for him to act, he hoped for a little cooperation in return. Whether as the current rank or as a true ally, he promised to help Lishenmin just as he was helping Master Zhu. As we watch, Lishenmin listened to Insean's reasoning and found himself feeling deeply moved. He realized that the current Insean had skyrocketed in status, and his future was now truly limitless. Moreover, since Insean knew his life story so well, Lishenmin began to think about his own eventual retirement. By then, he certainly hoped that Insean would be there to provide him with all the help he might need. And so, we see that Lishenmin is now fully prepared to continue his cooperation with Insean. Deep down, he realized that Insean was actually a sentimental man who valued justice above all else. Fine, you've convinced me, he conceded. You have my word. He told him to go enjoy a meal with Chen Fun, though he warned that this matter remained quite problematic. As compensation for the trouble, he demanded 10 bottles of training serum, a fair price, in his mind. Before Insean could even respond, Chen Fun snatched the phone away from Lishenmin once again. She was indignant, demanding to know why he was asking for compensation just for her having dinner. She wondered aloud if she was really that unpleasant to look at, but Lishenmin simply hung up on her. Insien moved quickly, reclaiming his phone before Chunfin had a chance to truly lose her temper. He had been listening intently, of course, to every word exchanged between Dean Chun and Director Lee. He reminded her that she had heard the promise, and asked if she would now proceed with Professor Zhu's surgery. We can see the blue veins bulging on Chunfin's forehead as she struggled to maintain her composure. She gritted her teeth and muttered that she knew, and was going to prepare for the operation immediately. Insien watched as Professor Zhu was led away, offering a few parting words to Dean Chun. He suggested she take a moment to calm down, lest her hands tremble when she finally picked up the scalpel. Chunfin shot Insien a look that was anything but polite. To be perfectly honest, it was quite sharp. She dryly informed him that for the type of procedure she performed, a scalpel wasn't even necessary. Insien feigned a bit of fear, nodding and admitting that her skill was indeed a relief to hear. Still, he urged her to stay steady, noting that if the equipment failed, the surgery wouldn't go well. And with that, after leaving behind a contact number, he watched as they prepared for the task ahead. He told her not to fear the outcome of the surgery, offering a final word of encouragement. He still had some time, though the tension from the recent call seemed to linger in the air. He reminded her to pass certain notices to Lishaman before politely thanking Dinshin for her cooperation. In Chapter 92, we see Zhou Jingwu looking quite anxious, his heart filled with a growing fury. Olive, however, felt no sympathy. He had seen such sights too often and had long since become numb. Besides, being able to visit a hospital at all made one better off than most in Safe Zone 1412. At this moment, Olive's attention was fixed entirely on one thing, the secrets held by Insien. He realized, perhaps with a bit of frustration, that he could no longer simply earn Insien's trust. Every conversation had been shut down, leaving him with only one way to get inside Insien's head. He would have to exploit his weaknesses. The more he found, the tighter their connection would become. Only then would he be able to extract the information he so desperately wanted from Insien's mouth. Deep down, Olive was certain that Insien carried the heavy nightmare of trying to change the world. To that end, Olive decided to help. After leaving the room, he gave instructions to the policewoman nearby. Olive paused for a beat, telling her to keep a very close watch on Zhou Jiang and his mother. If someone attempted to kill them, she was to record the scene meticulously and preserve all evidence. He told her to bring the proof to him, but to stay hidden and record silently if an attack occurred. There was no need to interfere. He wanted her to do nothing until she had sufficient evidence in hand. To him, the lives of these two people were simply not that important in the grand scheme of things. If their deaths could provide the evidence needed to catch a killer, he considered the mission a success. Olive then lit a blood-red cigar, adjusting his collar as if preparing for the cold work ahead. He promised her that if she completed this task, he would consider transferring her when he returned to Shidu to enjoy himself. She assured him, with great determination, that she would definitely put in the effort. He warned her, however, that he expected her to never try being clever or deceptive with him again. If she were to take even one wrong step along the way, the consequences would be severe. He made it clear that he could no longer guarantee her secret. The fact that she was faking her sequence identity would remain hidden. She understood perfectly. It was the classic carrot and the stick approach, and she had no choice but to follow. Olive believed he knew exactly how to handle people, though he remained unsure of how to truly train someone like her. He deduced that Insien was the type of person who performed far better than any mere bait ever could. Insien was a man accustomed to cutting problems out by the root, eliminating everything that stood in his path. This meant, naturally, that he would eventually find a definitive way to kill Zhou Yan. We must remember that Zhou Yan is still just a student, even if he happens to be a master of a sequence skill. Deep down, he knew that killing Zhou Yan would inevitably lead to a heavy reckoning and accountability. And this, as it turned out, was the very first weakness of Insien that Olive intended to exploit. Secondly, Olive was so absorbed in his own thoughts that he failed to notice the complex look in Roy Linda's eyes. Roy already knew, from overhearing Olive and the administration staff, that Olive was setting an ambush for Insien to force Roy's obedience. Olive intended to hold Roy's secret over his head, using it as a permanent threat to keep him in line. On the surface, it seemed as though Olive's plan was entirely infallible. It is a pity, however, that Olive wasn't the only one who knew Roy Linda's sequence was a fake. Insien knew as well, dating back to the moment when Naiwen had first met with him. Even though no official report was made, Roy Linda had already made an educated guess based on the voice and the figure he encountered. He had been waiting for an opportunity, until just a few days ago, when Insien surprisingly entered his field of vision under an increasingly hidden name. He was surprised to discover that the lack of security in Insien's confidences with the person threatening him completely confirmed Insien's identity. But now, he finds himself in the position of having to deal with Insien once again. Olive and Insien are like demons, and in a very short time at that. They will surely extract every secret from this docile little sheep. What's worse, there is no way to control them, as they both happen to agree on something. And so, we see this ordinary policeman left trapped in the middle of a metaphorical prison. This is what they call a clash of gods, where the little devil is the one who suffers, which, naturally, is quite unfortunate for him. For Roy Linda, there simply is no choice. While he might dare to offend the others, Insean is even more unapproachable. The only way to come out unscathed, to be honest, is to not get involved from the very beginning. If nothing happens, he naturally won't have to worry about it. We see that the police station is located quite close to the hospital. Roy Linda said his goodbyes to Olive and then headed back to the police station first. Knock, knock, knock. Roy Linda rapped on the door of the guardroom. The door opened, and the guard recognized him immediately as Officer Roy Linda. When asked if something was wrong, Roy Linda offered an apologetic smile, clutching his black phone in his hand. He explained that his phone was out of battery, a classic excuse, of course. He asked to use the landline, and the guard told him it was no problem at all. With a quick thank you, Roy Linda dialed the phone number he had just memorized from his mobile. "Hello, Aaron. It's me. I'm going to have to miss tonight," he said into the receiver. "I'm sorry. Yes, there's a case at the hospital. I have to work overtime. Next time for sure. Yes, goodbye." Roy Linda hung up the phone, smiled at the guard, and told him he was heading out. "Thank you. It's no problem at all," the guard replied, noting how difficult the officer's job must be. He muttered something about the constant problems in this particular area. Roy Linda walked away, wearing a smile that was, to be honest, a bit uncomfortable. The guard simply shook his head as he watched him go. If only everyone could be as elegant and generous as Roy Linda, he thought. It would make for a much kinder and more enthusiastic journey. Suddenly, the guardroom phone rang. The sharp sound of the bell echoed through the small room. It rang again. This was Secure Zone number 14121. "Police Station Communications Room. How can I help you?" the guard answered. There was only a series of beeps before the caller hung up, causing the guard to frown in annoyance. Another prank call. He told himself that next time, he should suggest a landline with caller ID. He wondered who was behind this harassment, perhaps someone related to the mayor or Lydia Min's request. By the time Insean returned to the director's office, night had already fallen. He was coming back from the hospital and had stopped at a restaurant to pack 3 dishes for dinner. When he opened the door, we see that Lydia Min was still sitting there in the office. Lydia Min held a cigarette in his hand, looking coldly at Insean while remaining lost in a daze. We see the ashtray on the desk is already overflowing with cigarette butts. Insean calmly placed the food on the coffee table right next to the sofa. He sat down on the sofa and picked up his chopsticks, ready to eat. "Vijoli, do you want to eat something together?" he asked, but the man replied he had no appetite. Noticing that Lydia Min's state of mind seemed off, Insean set his chopsticks back down. "Vijoli, what's wrong?" "It's nothing," he replied. "I was just thinking about things from the past." Insean mentioned the Divine Core Consortium, speaking in a curious tone about the core itself. It didn't seem strange to him. It appeared to possess such immense power. He wondered why it seemed so different to Lydia Min, who was too listless to even meet Insean's eyes. "It's none of your business," Lydia Min stated, and Insean simply shrugged his shoulders. "All right then, since you're not eating, I'll just go ahead and eat by myself." He opened the lunchbox, and a sudden burst of noodle fragrance filled the air. It was the scent of roasted chicken thighs, enough to make anyone's mouth water, to be honest. Lydia Min mentioned that, by the way, he had received a call from the police station that afternoon. It was meant for him, apparently. With a chicken thigh in his mouth, Insean asked vaguely what they wanted. It wasn't clear. It was a girl, and she said a few disorganized words. She said something about being unable to attend a party due to some sudden incidents. After saying she didn't want to talk to Lydia Min, he called back only to discover the origin of the number. It was the station's public line. Since Insean hadn't even reached the hospital yet, the call was quite strange. "Normally, I have to remind you of these things," Insean muttered, frowning as he pondered the true intention behind that call. We return to the hospital murder case. He had only killed Zhou Yang's father, not the girl herself. It was a good thing he remembered that, and thinking about it, Insean's mood improved significantly. "I know, it should be Daoji," he noted, advising not to provoke Zhou Yang any further. It was highly probable that Zhou Yang was already being watched by the police station. He understood the intention behind the call, and Insean also guessed who the woman was that called Li Tianmin. It was the female police officer he had met at the station, of course. "There is only one, Luo Jillian," he said. "Is she coming?" Luo Jillian has already guessed my identity, he realized, which changed the situation entirely. Perhaps because she didn't want to cause trouble, she hadn't actually asked him to save her. Her call was likely intended to make him give up on the idea of killing Zhou Yang. To avoid complications, and after hesitating, she said her own affairs had dragged her down. Insean simply smiled. In his view, she was clearly overthinking the whole matter. After all, Zhou Yang hadn't even finished high school yet. If he were to kill her now, it would only bring him unnecessary problems. Even if he intended to pull the weeds out by the roots, he would wait until her college entrance exams were over. Li Tianmin blew out a puff of smoke and asked, "Do you really plan to kill Zhou Yang?" "Of course," he replied, knowing that every day she lives, she accumulates power to become a mortal enemy. "If I don't kill her, what then? Will you leave her for me to control?" Li Tianmin shook his head helplessly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "You say you're young, yet you're always killing people. I don't know who you're learning this from." Insean didn't even bother to look at him, maintaining his usual cold indifference. He was always talking about that school all day long, which was becoming quite tedious. "Can I report you, right now?" he asked, just as Insean's mobile phone began to ring. The message was clear: tomorrow at 5:30 in the afternoon, near the Penbin restaurant. Insean turned to Li Tianmin and told him, boldly, tomorrow at 5:30 in the afternoon. Go to the Penbin restaurant to see Chen Fun. You know, as we agreed, you must give me the critic sequence. The critic sequence. Insean casually picked at his ears as he spoke. Can't you even wait to snatch it away? Li Tianmin asked, stubbing out his cigarette. I will snatch it, he replied. Boldly, games are games and jokes are jokes, but what are you doing? Deep down, he felt he wasn't particularly incapable of taking a joke, but this was different. Zoxian gave me a special quota, but it's only for a rank 5 critic sequence. You're treating me like your insurance just so you can have dinner with Chunfun and a big shot like him. Not only do you not pay me, but you also want my sequence form. It's really too much. Dining with him was a troublesome affair, and he only did it because he owed a favor. He wouldn't see that womanizer again if he could help it, and who could blame him, really? Stop doing that. I can't have you getting all sentimental here, Insean added, growing impatient. If you want a form, I won't let you choose. Just open a list and be done with it. Li Tianmin noted that Insean was certainly no stranger to this particular sequence form. He wondered how he would deal with it, considering he had never seen him struggle before. Insean suddenly felt that Li Tianmin was being quite shameless. What exactly do you mean by that? Is your sequence form in my office? He asked, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion. Is there something going on? We see it too. So many days have passed, and he still hasn't recovered his sequence form. That doesn't mean he doesn't need it at all, a fact reflected clearly in Insean's cold gaze. What? He hesitated, as he had clearly bought a case specifically to lock away his own sequence form. He hadn't expected Li Tianmin to open it in secret. It seemed Li Tianmin had bypassed his permission entirely. To ensure Insean's attack didn't fully dissipate, he reminded him that one shouldn't touch others' belongings so lightly. Li Tianmin waved his hand calmly, telling him not to be nervous, as he wasn't that curious about his secrets anyway. Since the sequence ability awakened, many things remain unexplained, and the natural order hasn't been fully established. He calculated that roughly 1 in 10 sequencers would be hiding some very deep, dark secrets. Since he didn't need it, he suggested giving it to him instead, which, after all, made some sense. He knew he needed to achieve excellent results during the special admission process. He also needed to continue hunting gods, and for that, he required him to act as his insurance. All he really needed was for him to explain the nature of the sequence form. It wasn't an excessive request. Besides, he originally had no intention of asking for it at all. But since he'd caused this massive headache with Chen Fun, he demanded the expenses to deal with the trouble first. He felt he was being led along, and Insean's fists clenched involuntarily as he tried to understand the situation. The problem was that his relationship with Li Tianmin was far too unusual. Killing him was no longer an option. He could solve the issue of the sequence form if it meant stabilizing this greasy, middle-aged man, Li Tianmin. It would also address everyone's concerns when the time came to decide on hunting gods in the future. Li Tianmin was pushing his luck, wanting even more pattern sequences just to be safe, as one does. Insean realized he had to clarify things now. If he later decided to hunt the gods, he was essentially being used as an insurance policy. How do I plan to split it? Li Tianmin asked. It's the same as before. Just give me half the money, and that's enough. This statement caught Insean off guard, as he had fully expected Li Tianmin to demand an exorbitant price. At the very least, he wasn't taking half of the pattern sequences. The dispute, it seemed, was only ever about the money. Insean couldn't help but doubt the man's sincerity. Are you actually being serious? He asked. Is there any need for me to lie? Li Tianmin replied, explaining that the whole reason for the dinner with Chun Fun was to test the sequences. He pointed out that Insean's current situation was a bit of an embarrassment, asking if he thought his words were some kind of joke. Li Tianmin's indifferent and calm attitude was starting to make Insean feel a little uneasy, which, to be honest, was a natural reaction. It appeared that Li Tianmin truly did have his own reservations about that dinner with Chun Fun. Insean couldn't resist asking more, knowing that Chun Fun's background was incredibly complicated. Faced with two looming problems, Li Tianmin chose not to give Insean a straight answer. Instead, he simply gathered his clothes and left the hotel, leaving Insean all alone in the room. He sat there eating thoughtfully, wondering if the food had grown cold or if it was just his mood. Still feeling ignored by the world, Insean finally tossed his chopsticks aside with a frustrated curse. Everything seemed to be a problem. Eventually, he turned and headed into the bathroom for a much-needed cold shower. When he finally stepped out, we see him check his phone, only to find more than 20 missed calls waiting for him. His heart sank. He had a nagging feeling that something troublesome had happened while he was occupied. The calls came from two different numbers. One had dialed 21 times, while the other had tried twice. Looking at the screen, he knew these numbers couldn't possibly be related to the system group's work. Feeling quite unlucky, he decided to start by calling back the first number, the one that had been so persistent. Hello, this is Insean. Who is this? He asked, though the voice on the other end sounded strangely mechanical. It's me, Shin Sison, the voice replied, but Insean paused for a moment. He didn't recall ever hearing that name. You kidnapped me, remember? I'm the nephew of the foreign minister, Shun Wendao, the man clarified. Ah, so it turned out to be that idiot. Oh, so you're the one calling me, Insein remarked dryly. When he asked what was wrong, Shin Sisan explained that his uncle had run into serious trouble while having dinner at home. Was he arrested by the administration? Insein mused, noting that the man had certainly been making quite an impression lately. And as the primary insurer, he was now facing a literal chorus of murderous voices calling for his head. There was definitely something deeper going on here. Can you help my uncle? Shin Sisan pleaded. Insein didn't leave him hanging for long. He gave his answer in just under 5 seconds. He asked why the man had been arrested, but Shin Sisan admitted it wasn't clear what the administration agents were thinking. The official charge was the illegal use of a massive number of sequence patterns, but the nephew insisted this was a total fabrication. He argued that since his uncle's own sequence had always stayed at level 2, there was no way he could simulate such a pattern. To be honest, Shin Sisan's reasoning didn't hold much weight in Insein's eyes. After all, who's to say that if you simulate a sequence pattern, you have to be the one using it? Besides, considering Shin Sisan is a bit of a blockhead, he could easily be confused about how these sequences actually work. If he handed over the pattern for use, the protector would eventually be sold off anyway, which is just how these things go. Even so, Insein found himself believing that Shun Wendao wouldn't actually simulate a sequence pattern himself. It was quite simple. If he had simulated a pattern and the ancient matrix had created a sequence identity for him, why would he bother selling patterns to Africa or dealing with the logistics of transferring them to Pempe? He would still have to be in Ansi every day, and his chat room would be a constant headache, unless, of course, Shin Wendao had a secret. He is the kind of person who chooses to come to him, following a familiar rhythm, even for something as serious as an arrest. Fei Insein understands that Shun Wendao has performed miracles, though he mostly kept them a secret. He would never do anything to put himself in danger, as simulating a sequence pattern is a grave crime. He once stood in the shadow of the world god, overseeing the joint government's laws regarding sequence patterns. Simply asking about simulating a sequence pattern was enough, according to current regulations, to warrant a death sentence. It would mean immediate execution, and Shun Wendao certainly isn't worth that kind of money. He told Shin Sisan not to get him killed, wondering why on earth the man was calling him in the first place. He warned him not to seek out his uncle's colleagues, but the nephew explained that his uncle had specifically told him to make contact. Since Wendao had been arrested, the poor man was now completely unreachable. Insein asked why he was being called and what he was expected to do, but the nephew had no idea, hoping Insein would have a plan. Insein cursed to himself. The man had rejected the administration several times and was now asking him for advice. He felt a surge of brave anger, but he told himself not to get upset over nothing and tried to guide Shin Sisan instead. First, he didn't actually want to see Qian Wendao. He just wanted to figure out what the situation was. The man was currently being held by the administration, and we have to wonder if the nephew understood what that implied. Shin Sisan remained silent for a moment, lost in thought. Suddenly he spoke up, realizing that he did, in fact, remember something important. When they took his uncle away, it wasn't actually an arrest, but rather an investigation order. This meant that he hadn't been officially processed or separated from the outside world yet. According to the regulations, he was still permitted to meet with members of his family. He asked if Insein was free, offering to take him to the administration under the guise of being his uncle's personal interest. There is no time to lose, so he decides to head out right this very second. He tells Shin Sisan they will meet at the administration gates, and with that, Insein hangs up the phone. He quickly dries his messy hair and throws on a jacket to get ready. Dressed in civilian clothes, he heads out, feeling a bit of excitement as he makes another call while on the move. When the person on the other end answers, he simply says, "Hello, this is Insein." The voice asks what he wants, noting that he is outside. It is Olab on the line. As soon as that deep voice resonates from the other side, we see Insein tense up and become alert once more. He can't help but slow his pace, carefully considering the implications of Olab's call. He wonders what the man wants, where he is, and what any of this could possibly have to do with him. Olab demands an alibi, causing Insein to let out a frustrated snort. He explains that he is at the school and is just about to leave the premises. He tells Olab that if he doesn't believe him, he can come to the school himself to check. He suggests Olab check the surveillance tomorrow morning if he doubts he was at school, asking why he's being questioned. Insein is growing quite impatient now. The mere thought of Olab seems to irritate him. He asks, somewhat bitterly, if the inspector has stumbled upon yet another murder and dismemberment case. He wonders if Olab plans to pin it on him, asking the inspector if he could kindly stop staring so intently at him. He points out that he was seen on the bus when he returned to school from the hospital. Plenty of people can testify to that, meaning the inspector has absolutely nothing on him. Insein lets out a soft, dry chuckle, feeling that his words should have made his point clear enough. He repeats firmly that he left the hospital and took the bus, and that is the end of it. He returned to school afterward, wondering where he could possibly hide. It was nothing, really, just walking around, waiting, and so on. And so, it seems this case really wasn't his doing after all. Insein tells him to stop playing games, asking what case he's even talking about. The inspector concedes that even if what he says is true, there is still a but. Zhou Yong and his mother were found dead together in the alleyway. What? We see and freeze, completely dumbfounded by the news. Now he understands the suspicion. After all, he had just killed the boy's father, or so the logic goes. They love the idea of pulling weeds by the root, to avoid future trouble, of course. He claims he killed him, but if Olab truly believes that, he has seriously misjudged our protagonist. He isn't a fool, and he knows the connection between Zhou Yong and that student. Killing Zhou Yong would only bring him more problems, which he certainly doesn't need. Even if the case has nothing to do with him, the police still have their protocols. They still need his cooperation, though he insists he has nothing to offer since he wasn't involved. Because this case is particularly significant, it requires a very serious investigation. Surely, when these miracle payers appear, we will see just how Europol operates. Once the case is cleared, he won't be bothered anymore, but for now, the operatives must remain under surveillance. They are talking about Budapest now. Mike Tesla is practically a presidential candidate. Meanwhile, Incian boards the bus, staring at the blue envelope on his phone for a long time. He needs to go speak with Ben. Today, he really should pay a visit to Lance Sinby. We see Incian's phone, looking out at the city through the window. It feels as though he sees nothing at all. He knows he simply cannot leave Professor Zhu alone in the hospital. If he doesn't go to speak with Ben today, Incian realizes the man will likely die. He is expected to cooperate vigorously with the National Police Bureau's investigation. They want him to provide whatever clues he knows, even if, in reality, he has no clues to give. He shouldn't provide anything, however, because the shadow of death hanging over this is far too large. The death of Zhou Yin is a delicate matter. Incian even wondered if whoever killed Zhou Zhu did it as a favor to help him. Killing Zhou Yin isn't the main issue. The real problem is that this person also killed the policewoman who was following him. Killing an officer with sequence abilities is undoubtedly a capital offense, and death is inevitable if the culprit is caught. According to Orlov, after the killer took their lives, he burned the bodies. This was done to prevent any possibility of them being brought back, a grim precaution, to be sure. It was a calculated move to ensure that their deaths were final and absolute. By now, Incian has spent far too much energy. Deep down, he is utterly exhausted. After a short while, however, he knows he must still find the strength to pull himself together. On his way to see Lex 1 at the administration office, Incian rests his head against the car window. After Qianjin fell asleep, more than an hour passed before he finally woke up. He took another deep breath as he finally arrived at the sequencer administration. He stepped off the bus and patted his cheeks to wake himself up, trying to feel energetic again. He walked toward the building, the central office where everything would be decided. Outside the administration, he spotted a familiar face that seemed to recognize only Incian. Incian, you've arrived, Senshin said as he spotted him approaching. As if he were seeing a long-awaited hope, Senshin hurried over to greet Incian. I can finally help. Come inside quickly, he urged. And so, the two of them stepped through the doors of the administration building. Senshin explained his identity, stating he needed to see Incian to question him about the case. The administration staff then led them to a room that was completely sealed off. We see 4 guards standing watch outside the room, their presence a silent warning. Judging by their stance, every one of them was a sequence ability user. Inside, the former section chief was already waiting, sitting quietly in the room. With a polite nod of thanks, they both entered and came face to face with the former chief. The former chief's eyes were filled with a murderous intent, his arms crossed and the veins in his neck bulging with tension. Upon seeing Senshin, Incian took a deep, steadying breath. I'm sorry to trouble you. Please, go ahead. I didn't originally want to reveal our connection. But this time, I've run into trouble. Aside from you, I truly have no other friends I can trust. That's why I asked Senshin to bring you here, hoping we could find a solution together. Incian walked over toward the light near the former chief and pulled out a chair to sit. Senshin knew, of course, that Incian likely had a few cards left to play. So he sat obediently by Incian's side, remaining silent as he listened to the exchange with the former chief. Former section chief, what exactly is the situation? Incian asked with clear intent. In short, someone in the administration stole sequence medicines and then framed me for it. Is there any proof? Incian asked, and the former chief, Excandeo, nodded solemnly. Yes, he replied. They tampered with the surveillance footage. On that specific day, he was the only one seen entering the sequence medicine vault, though it wasn't solid evidence. He wondered why they hadn't found his old formula or any proof he'd used the medicines privately. Do you know who is trying to ruin you? Incian asked, but Excandeo simply shook his head. This was the point that worried him most. In the administration, he had clearly never offended anyone. He had always been the type to mind his own business, and nothing more. How could this happen, he muttered. They were claiming he had secretly used several bottles for himself. Excandeo flashed a bitter smile. 10 bottles, specifically, the ones designed in red. It happened right during the transition. If this hadn't occurred, he would have been promoted to department head next week. As he said this, the former chief, Excandeo, let out another hollow smile. I heard you went god hunting and brought back quite a harvest, he remarked. He admitted he originally wanted to take advantage of Incian's success, but now he was glad he hadn't. Otherwise, he would be in a truly difficult spot, a fact Incian acknowledged with a slight, understanding nod. He knew Excandeo wanted to ask for help with the trial, but there were listening devices in the room. And so, he didn't speak too clearly, though Encian had already managed to secure 1,600 points. Whether by defeating the enemy or listening closely, he knew the value of that killer insect scale. If Excandeo was looking for him, it was because he needed a food sequence agent. Encian estimated that even if Excandeo didn't say it outright, he would eventually express his need. But the grim reality remained. Excandeo had already been compromised and targeted by unseen hands. Otherwise, Encian wouldn't just have to agree to asking Gachan for help. "Are you saying the person who framed you replaced the operation and the connections?" he asked. "I will definitely give you some unique answers to that question," the other replied. It seems they set the trap just before his life took this major turn. We see Tingwendo's triangular eyes shift as he considers the weight of the situation. "It makes sense. It's all right. You really don't need to thank me too much," he said calmly. If they spoke ill of him in his own home, then the charges against him would surely stick. Tingwendo had been keeping a secret record, which was fine, given his relationship with our protagonist. They had been watching him for a long time, as Injikan's lineage is truly excellent. His potential is strong, and within the administration, his promotion had been under scrutiny for ages. Tingwendo shook his head, muttering that he'd been careless and calling them a pack of beasts. He clearly hadn't gone looking for trouble with anyone, yet they all seemed to want him dead. Encian asked once more, "Ingachan, what exactly do you plan to achieve by calling me here?" Tingwendo didn't try to hide it. He admitted what he had originally been thinking. He wanted Encian to tell the administration that he'd added 10 bottles of the sequence medicine and returned them. "That way I can clear my name. I'll return the favor to the administration later," he explained. Encian paused, realizing that the method Tingwendo mentioned could actually work. But there was surveillance here. By speaking it aloud, the plan would surely be discovered by others. Encian looked at Tingwendo with a touch of wonder, unsure of what he truly meant. Tingwendo let out a cold snort, though his sharp eyes showed no real murderous intent. "After your analysis, I understand that someone had already planned everything," he admitted. Regardless of their schemes, he hadn't actually used the sequence yet. Furthermore, the surveillance footage couldn't actually prove the escape sequence method was used. The details simply didn't align with the inconsistent blood tea they found. He knew that monitoring his internal sequence, whether in private or during an escape, was incredibly difficult. Even so, it was far from certain that a way out actually existed. "Since they are treating me like a pawn, I might as well play along with them," he decided. On ordinary days, they always spoke so kindly to his face. Tingwendo muttered that they truly thought he was soft-hearted, noting how everyone was playing a double game. We shall have to wait and see who comes out on top when the dust finally settles. Chapter 96. Heading actively to the police station. Encian looked at Tingwendo and asked if he intended to handle the matter himself. "Of course," Tingwendo replied, his expression now darker than ink. He was determined to resolve this personally. The wolf had already made its move, but he still offered his thanks. "You gave me the direction, but I didn't actually ask you to help me," he pointed out. He claimed he was merely offering an opinion, which, to be honest, was a bit of an understatement. "No, you are quite right," he conceded, realizing they had been watching him all along. He knew that if he gave in this time, there would inevitably be a next time. Instead of letting the problem simmer like lamb soup, he decided it was better to pull it out by the roots. And so, Encian and Sensizin finally took their leave and departed from the administration. On their way out, we see Encian keeping a close eye on Sensizin. "Remember, don't do anything," he warned. "If it becomes necessary, Tingwendo will definitely let you know." He made it clear that if this problem arose again, Sensizin shouldn't try to act on his own. "Contact me first, understood?" Even though Sensizin was older, he found himself instinctively deferring to Encian. He nodded his head in agreement, promising that he would remember the instruction. Deep down, Encian was quite worried about Sensizin, who often failed to think things through and panicked at the slightest rumor. Fortunately, even though Sensizin could be a bit clumsy at times, he was loyal. But as he listened, he feared his own inadequacy, despite always acting as if he knew everything. Since he couldn't simply ignore the advice or send him away, he decided to let matters rest for the moment. "I'll have time to figure it out later," he thought, feeling a brief sense of gratitude toward his companion. Sensizin certainly hadn't expected that one day he would have to force this man to actually use his phone. He didn't really want to say thank you, but there was no denying that Encian was standing by him now. It felt like the same old battle. After leaving the administration building, Encian set off on his own. He headed straight for the police station, intending to find Olaf first to get a better grasp of the situation. He needed to uncover the truth behind this matter, and soon enough, he arrived at the station doors. The guard's questioning tone immediately demanded to know just who he was. "What are you doing at the station?" the guard asked, as Encian explained he was looking for Inspector Olaf. He stated that he wanted to understand the details regarding today's triple murder case. The guard was well aware of what had happened that day, but providing an answer wasn't so simple. To be honest, he didn't dare take the responsibility of letting a stranger in so easily. The guard dialed Olaf's number, the office phone, to be precise. "Hello, Inspector Olaf. Someone is here looking for you," he announced. "He says you called him." The guard then turned his gaze toward Encian. "What's your name?" "Encian?" "He says his name is Encian." Who are you? Insean. Fine, Insean. I understand. Goodbye. He hung up the phone and extended a hand, pointing toward the hallway. The second office on the left. Inspector Olaf is waiting for you there. Thank you. Insean walked toward the office door and gave it a gentle knock. Come in. Insean opened the door and found himself face to face with Olaf once again. His outfit seemed as though it hadn't changed in 1,000 years, complete with a scarf wrapped around his neck. He offered a cup of yellow tea, noting it wasn't quite like the tea favored by the Chinese. Try it. Insean sat down and lifted the teacup, settling into the chair. As he blew on the steam, Insean remarked that he was neither Chinese nor European. In his view, when looking toward the future, everyone was essentially the same. Olaf took a pen and began writing, mentioning the need to cooperate with the government. I didn't expect you to come looking for me so actively, the inspector admitted. Insean explained that the rumors were growing too loud, and he wanted to clarify things before the situation escalated. Olaf paused to think, concluding that chatting with him further might just be a waste of time. We see Olaf nodding, though he looked upon Luo Yiliana with a certain sense of disdain. Did you ever say that? He asked. That Luo Yiliana is the officer who died. Yes, you don't know her, though perhaps you've heard her name mentioned, Olaf replied. Insean admitted he might have seen her, but he rarely paid much attention to the people at the police station. You are the only one I deal with every day, he added. I don't really understand the others. It was true that their relationship had grown deep enough that they could certainly say they knew each other. As for actual friendship, however, he feared that was a topic they couldn't quite discuss yet. Olaf set his pen down and crossed his hands on the table, sighing much like Insean had. If you didn't have such a solid alibi, I should have reported this directly and had you arrested. He even joked about the police being tortured, or rather, that he would be the one torturing Insean. Insean noted he had already crossed to the other shore as Olaf reached for his teacup. He remained as cautious as ever, knowing that, for now, everything was merely speculation. Fine then, I will ask you about your own affairs, the inspector decided. Since there were no formal suspicions, he asked if Insean knew if Zhou Yang had any enemies. From Insean's perspective, he believed that Zhou Yang's greatest enemy was likely himself. He harbored a deep hatred for his father's killer, and aside from Insean, he was quite ruthless. In theory, the man didn't have many other enemies to speak of. Olaf then brought up a scanning device, and the conversation shifted back to more human matters. Intrigued, Insean asked about this scanning device Olaf was referring to. Did they find Li Jingwen? And why are you asking about him specifically? He wondered if Olaf wasn't also independent from his own master's influence. I only have a bold assumption, Olaf whispered, and Insean urged him to tell him everything. Insean leaned forward, pulling his chair closer as he asked across the table if Olaf truly thought such a thing was possible. We learned that Li Jingwen's entire family had been murdered by Zhou Yang and his associates. Li Jingwen had been a witness to the whole tragedy, only managing to escape through a stroke of pure luck. After his narrow escape, it seems Li Jingwen awakened a sequence ability of his own. And then, naturally, he would have returned to avenge his family by killing Zhou Yang and his mother. Olaf snorted coldly, asking what kind of mythological fairy tale Insean was trying to spin for him. Insean maintained that this assumption, while certainly bold, was actually quite reasonable. He urged Olaf to consider the situation regarding Zhou Yang and the matter of Li Jingwen. Zhou Yang had offended him so deeply that his own uncle had nearly cut him off from the family entirely. So, it wasn't far-fetched to think his father might have called someone in one day. Perhaps he ordered the death of Li Jingwen's entire family just to avoid any future complications. If that were the case, Li Jingwen's sudden disappearance would finally make perfect sense. He would have returned for blood, having awakened a sequence ability that gave him the power to kill. But upon his return, he would have discovered that Zhou Yang's father had already been killed by Insean. And so he chose the next best targets. He eliminated Zhou Yang and his mother instead. Olaf nodded slowly, admitting the theory was difficult to swallow, though he saw one major problem. The inspector wondered why, if Li Jingwen was back for revenge, he hadn't tried to kill Insean as well. Kill me. Insean burst out laughing at the very suggestion. He pointed out that his own training was far too strong for someone like that to ever take him down. Olaf sighed and told him to stop talking nonsense, bringing our conversation back to reality. Olaf notes that since it's clear Insean wasn't the one who did it, he is no longer a suspect. He tells him to hurry up and get back, as he doesn't want his time wasted any further. Insean simply rubs his eyebrows, looking a bit bored by the whole ordeal, which, to be honest, is quite typical of him. Indeed, he doesn't seem very enthusiastic, and Olaf nods in agreement. He admits the theory is a tough one to swallow, but points out there's still a lingering problem. If Li Jingwen returned for revenge after awakening a sequence ability, he would have surely wanted to kill Insean too. Olaf asks what the problem is, noting that if Li Jingwen is the one seeking revenge, Insean is in the clear. He urges him to hurry back and stop wasting his time. It's clear he's not enthusiastic. He tells him to hurry back, not to waste time, as Olaf nods at the difficult theory. Indeed, he doesn't seem enthusiastic at all. To be perfectly honest, he really isn't showing much enthusiasm here. Olaf just nods, processing the information. He repeats that while the assumption is a stretch, a problem still remains. He clearly isn't enthusiastic and just wants him to hurry up and leave. Olaf nods, reiterating that the theory is difficult and that a problem persists. We see that he truly isn't enthusiastic about the situation. He tells him to hurry back and stop wasting time, clearly lacking any real enthusiasm. He just wants him to hurry up and go back without wasting any more of his time. We see a surge in concentration and essence. It's as if the very air is changing. And so, we find ourselves on the 30th of January, 2010. Silan, the cleaner, Siari. It was the year of his show, specifically the 16th of December. A Saturday, a day apparently deemed appropriate for repairing walls. It seems Zoe invited me today, Ben thought to himself. Regarding his sequence aspect, yesterday's leftovers were already cold, but that didn't stop him from grabbing them. He had a great deal of confidence in his stomach, you see, and wasn't worried in the slightest. The idea of getting a stomach ache from eating something bad simply didn't cross his mind. Even the divine ice silkworm could be digested by him, so a little cold food was hardly a challenge. After eating, he opened Lishaman's computer and began searching the sequence education forums. He was looking into the rankings of various sequence universities. He remained busy until noon, which was when Insean's mobile phone suddenly signaled a call. It rang out of nowhere. "Hello, Zoe," he answered. Zoe, indeed. He explained he was at the school, surprised she had arrived without saying a word to him. She had gone straight into the laboratory, specifically the director's office at the School of Physical Sciences. Insean then opened the box containing the sequence aspect. Inside, he counted 6 vials of sequence specimens. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," he said, and Zuzan entered abruptly, still wearing those familiar glasses. With his characteristic black-rimmed frames firmly in place, Insean wasted no time on small talk, simply pointing to the 6 items. There, resting on the table, were glass flasks containing a pale blue liquid. "Zuzan, these are the sequence specimens I promised to give you," he said calmly. "And so, our transaction is complete." Zuzan approached and tucked the 6 specimen vials away. He slipped them into his pocket, looking at Insean with a deeply conflicted expression. Insean looked up at Zuzan, wondering if this was all just about a research article. Uncle Zo had other matters to attend to. "Did you really dare to kill the student, Zoyen?" That was bold enough, but he never expected Insean would dare to kill a police officer as well. Uncle Zo was trying to piece it together, but when Zo Yin and the officer died, Insean had already returned to school. He insisted he had nothing to do with it, though Zuzan didn't seem to believe a word of it. Insean remained perfectly serene, leaning back with his feet resting casually on the table. He maintained that the case of Detective Orby and the officer had absolutely nothing to do with him. As for the identity of the real killer, well, that was still under investigation. "What's the matter?" he asked. "If you're so interested, you can always go to the station and ask." Zuzan asked again if it truly wasn't him, which left Insean feeling a bit grumpy. He argued his point. Was he crazy? Would he really kill a policeman just to get to Zoyen? Who was Zoyen anyway? Certainly not someone worth taking such a massive risk for. Zosin studied Insean closely. He didn't appear to be lying, so he gave a slight nod. "Yes, I'm quite puzzled myself," Zuzan admitted, which was an honest assessment of the situation. He knew Insean was highly intelligent, so doing something so irrational made very little sense. But there was no other hatred in that circle. Who else would have wanted Zoyen dead? And beyond that, they had even taken the life of a police officer. A bold move, indeed. A public police officer, undoubtedly. That would be madness, Zuzan remarked with a heavy sigh. "I know, you're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" Insean replied dismissively. Zuzan sighed again. "To be honest, the police station called yesterday to discuss the matter. To tell you the truth, it gave me quite a scare when I heard the news. I thought you had actually done it. It's a warning not to act too hastily," Insean noted. "Uncle Zo, even if I am a bit of a scoundrel from your friend's perspective, and speaking in a very sincere situation, I still have something I need to tell you." Zuzan glanced at him sideways. We see that he still views Insean with a certain curiosity. When it is Insean's time to act, he moves. When it is his moment, he is ready. You aren't usually personal, but when it's time to be personal, you are especially so. It is easy to lose an opportunity if things become too problematic, he mused. Zuzan values his eyes as much as his life. "It's fine, Uncle Zo, there are no other trainers. First, I must attend to my own affairs. Goodbye, I won't see you out." Zuzan walked away, lost in thought as he made his exit from the room. The air was full of voices of dissatisfaction, but Insean had no time to worry about them. After all, in his opinion, this whole situation was essentially your idea. Regarding Zuzan and their last conversation, it was more important to focus on the special admission. But constantly searching for information leads to fatigue, so he decided to balance work and rest. Sometimes he also opens the video files of Tianming Villa and Hejimin, making idle comments. Our work is truly ignorant, proceeding without us even realizing it. Night eventually fell, finding him sitting quite comfortably with one leg crossed over the other. He was deep into a siege and defense game when the door suddenly swung open, catching Insean acting like a machine. As soon as Tianyemin walked in, we have to wonder, was he actually planning to shoot Insean? "Xiao Yin, Hui Chen and I are here, so what exactly are you looking at?" "It's a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding? My boy, you'd better delete that for me right now." The annoyance of the gamble was clear. He was caught spying on the hard drive, and a cold sweat broke out on Insean's forehead. He reached for the door while still holding the mouse, accidentally crushing it instantly, a truly embarrassing sound. The noise echoed through the office, and he instinctively rushed to shut down the computer to restore the silence. He hadn't done it on purpose, of course. It was just a bit of curiosity, or so he told himself. That opera company of yours that lines up every day is going to get shot sooner or later. Insane. A dark day resonated as the current sequence of comments appeared a day earlier than expected. Lally, who are we to each other? Is there really any harm in just taking a look? What could possibly happen to you? Tyan Yemen took in the sequence of comments, and his expression became slightly more understanding. This business with Insean is looking promising. And what about the hot seafood? Lally, I took a look. My own god-hunting ranking points have only increased by a little over 200,000. If he wanted that special admission, he knew he'd have to head outside the safe zone and make some big moves. Could you perhaps bother Dao Insurance? You didn't exactly set the world on fire today. He pulled out a bottle shaped like a sequence, poured some water into the glass, and gave it a stir. Taking another drink, he looked at him and said, Insean, I have something I need to tell you. Tyan Yemen suddenly used Insean's full name, dropping the casual Xiao-in or the polite classmate title entirely. He allowed a sudden warning to settle deep within his heart. You said you consider me your insurer, and I even helped you get that sudden boost in the special admission details. Could that barely be considered a success? Of course, Lally, you don't really need to explain yourself. Besides all that, I also helped you deal with Chinfengua. Even though there will be a bit of exposure, provided this person isn't actually you. I'm not quite right, am I? I'm going to try and make you understand. I understand. Lally, you, and Zoao then. These are my requirements. Lydian Min examined Insean closely as he spoke. I have done so much, and it isn't out of greed for this replacement or some sense of hypocrisy. You promised that you were going to go look for Azazen. Chapter 98. It was time to reactivate the nerve sequence. The calculations were beginning. Lydian Min's careful calculations worked. They caused Insean to finally lower his guard. He was always good at hiding his true thoughts, so he simply lowered his head. Deep down, he was cursing the person who had killed Gajillion. He is a strangely weak ambassador, and Insean felt a bit conflicted about the whole thing. I guarantee you I've heard of one, but that person is already dead. Lydian Min smiled and made himself comfortable on the sofa. Insean, he began. You're mocking me. Death, you aren't lying to me, are you? Insean knew perfectly well that the goal was to find clues on a corpse. Lydian Min gave Insean a strange look. The longer someone is dead, the fewer traces they leave behind. It's quite incredible. Seeing you so certain, we can only assume this person died recently. One could say that, yes. It wouldn't happen to be the police officer murdered yesterday, would it? Insean looked directly at Lydian Min and simply nodded. After hearing this, Lydian Min's eyes snapped open instantly. His body suddenly lunged forward from the sofa, his hands bracing firmly against the table. He leaned in hungrily, face to face with Insean, separated by nothing more than a single sentence. Lydian Min asked, measuring every word. So you knew it from the very beginning? She is Suli of the 7 Explosions Palm, isn't she? Insean avoided Lydian Min's gaze. He moistened his lips and chose to remain silent. You knew all along. I never told you, and now that she's dead, you finally mention it. Lydian Min smiled with bitter irony. I treated you with sincerity, and is this how you play the game? In a situation like this, do I even have the shame left to keep speaking with you all? Insean, oh Insean, have you simply hurt me far too much? At that moment, Lydian Min looked as though he had lost every ounce of his strength. He suddenly collapsed back into the sofa. Insean, for his part, was left completely speechless. Insean listened to Lydian Min's words in silence. After a while, he was told to leave and never appear again. Lydian Min waved his hand dismissively, without sparing her another look. Insean nodded. Fine. After all, when it came down to it, he truly did feel sorry for Lydian Min. Previously, he had held on to Luo Julian's trump card to ensure leverage with Lydian Min, but after 2 days of deep communication, with the merging of various laws, she too had ceased to be so simple in her dealings with Lydian Min. Originally, our protagonist had planned to practice once more to ensure his own survival. After that, he intended to reveal to Lydian Min that Luo Julian was actually the swindler known as Sully. But he hadn't expected Luo Julian to be murdered, a development that changed everything. Even someone like her, who knew the property cases inside out, wouldn't dare kill a police officer. If she were that reckless, the first person she would have killed was Olaf, that old ghost. However, this time the disappointment caused her to lose Lydian Min as an ally, at least for the time being. Having lost Lydian Min's support, he gathered his luggage and the box filled with training equipment. He stepped out of the director's office to search for another place to take refuge. But as we know, in such a vast safe zone, truly secure places are few and far between. He thought it over again and again, until finally, he returned once more to the hideout of Wandefa and Hongbi Pan. At that moment, we see Wandefa in the middle of closing the rolling metal door. He was already prepared to head home, but when he turned around, he saw the figure of Insean standing there. Seeing him appear so suddenly, Wandefa stood there stunned for a moment, completely unable to speak. She had already heard the rumors about Insean hunting for life and devouring potential. It felt as though the two of them were exactly where they should be after being apart for so long. His emotions were running high, a complicated mix, and he wasn't sure if it was relief or regret he felt. He couldn't tell if it was joy or sadness washing over him as they met again this evening. His state of mind was far from simple, caught between a strange nervousness and a sudden spark of excitement. Whether it was a sense of comfort or a deep-seated longing, the moment simply happened. He told him not to come looking for him and simply to let him stay in the warehouse for 2 days. Defa smiled at him, assuring him it was no problem and that the bed in the warehouse was kept ready for whenever he might need it. He told him he wouldn't have to sleep on the floor, which, to be honest, was a bit of a lie. He reminded him that he was clearly the boss here, at least in name. Insean asked if he could still call him AFA and then quietly thanked him. After getting Insean settled into the warehouse, Defa finally headed home for the night. He could see quite clearly that Insean's state of mind was far from peaceful. So, he decided not to bother him too much, figuring that as long as Insean was still thinking for himself, there was no need to rush. Insean stared at the strange, long, undulating worm corpse, looking as though he wanted to say something. Suddenly, he recalled the engravings of the land of divine sound, where it was said the iron soul had already rotted away. He wondered if all of this could have been caused by the iron ghost. And so we move to chapter 99, titled A New Bet. We see a market where prices have plummeted to an extreme and devastating low. Then, Insean caught sight of a group of beings, all of them engulfed in flames. They emerged from the distant ruins, floating just above the ground and rapidly devouring any flesh and blood they found, leaving only death in their wake. He questioned again if this was truly the work of the Iron Ghost. Insean cursed under his breath, unsure if his best move was to stand and fight or simply run for his life. According to the ancient engravings, the Iron Ghost was indeed the cause of such devastation. It had been in a long slumber during the time of the Sandworm's feast, but according to Emperor Yen, things had changed. It had become a formidable enemy, yet the information appearing suggested it could also be the seedbed for the land of divine sound. Everything ahead remained an unknown future, but for now, he was certain the Iron Ghost was behind it all. They should really be considered rare specimens, as these iron turtles usually tend to scatter and move in large groups. They are far more numerous than the long-legged worms, thousands of them, in fact, and they always linger around the Sand City. However, the sheer number of these scattered iron turtles comes with a rather unhygienic and unpleasant flaw. You see, not every scattered iron turtle is created equal. The issue is their original plates. Often, less than a tenth of the scattered iron turtles actually possess one. Only a few will have that specific concave original plate located on the lower part of their abdomen. Even among the gods, the existence of the scattered iron turtle is considered something of an outrage. It is technically a god, yet most lack a plate, meaning one must kill 10 or 20 of them just to find a single original plate, and to earn a god hunting point. To make matters worse, the iron turtle isn't like the long-legged worm. The worm is useless and can be killed with a simple kick, but the turtle's body is a different story entirely. Its body replicates a chitin shell as hard as iron, serving as both a formidable weapon and a near-impenetrable defense. It far surpasses the long-legged worm in every way, which is quite a remarkable feat in its own right. Consequently, the scattered iron turtle is viewed as one of the gods with the absolute worst value for the effort required. As he considered this, Insean realized he couldn't simply break through their defenses with ease. He knew, above all else, that he couldn't hope to pierce their bulletproof physical constitution with brute force. Across their entire bodies, the only true vulnerabilities are the eyes and that soft spot on the lower abdomen. He feared he might even die of pure exhaustion, but fortunately, Lydianmin was following close behind him. She could use her close-range abilities to control the surrounding iron turtles whenever he ran out of energy. This would buy him the time he desperately needed, especially now, as he risked being completely surrounded. He had to be ready to dodge and shift his strategy at a moment's notice, which, as we know, is easier said than done. He realized he might be running out of time, for while his combat style was powerful enough to clear the mess, it wasn't yet complete. Insean picked up the old black iron box, hesitating for a moment as he weighed whether he should truly commit to this fight. After some thought, he headed toward the iron turtle's lair. Once there, he set the box aside and decided to face them head-on. Hunting these scattered iron turtles wasn't exactly profitable, but to be honest, he didn't have a better option at the moment. It is never easy to find gods worth hunting once you step outside the safety of the designated zones. As time passes, we know that most of the killer spirit orchids will eventually find themselves new masters. The usefulness of the killer spirit orchid pill in his hand was steadily diminishing, if I'm not mistaken. This would likely be the very last time, or perhaps the second to last, that he would ever use such a pill. As he held the orchid, the atmosphere around Insean seemed to grow heavier and more profound. The killer spirit orchid was now in a state of total battle readiness, sensing the conflict to come. He waited for the tide of iron turtle rats to arrive. The sounds of scuttling and killing grew closer and closer. That dense, chattering sound became clearer with every passing second. The vanguard of the iron turtle rat tide was almost upon him. They had reached a point just 3.5 meters from Insean, while more loomed in the distance. Countless black dots continued to emerge from the ruins at the very edge of his vision. We see the scales on their bodies catching the faint glow of the moonlight. They shimmered with a dim, cold light as Insane tensed his muscles and focused his gaze. In this corner of the universe, the projections of power and shifting forces began to cloud the battlefield. The various energies at play started to converge from 4 different directions as the pressure mounted. He began to move, bracing himself for the difficult day that lay ahead among the trees. We return to the action as the momentum begins to shift in this strange and deadly dance. We see that he is finally able to use his feet to stomp and crush the tide of iron turtle rats, standing his ground against them. Even if it requires a bit of effort, he prepares his reverse blade technique, 100 cuts in one lethal, killing movement. This burst of pure violence will only last for 10 minutes. Even if he has the skill's cooldown to consider, he is well aware of the risks involved. Continuously unleashing high-intensity skills like this will surely exhaust his body, which, naturally, is the last thing he needs. He cannot afford to let his guard down, for both his front and back must remain untouched by the swarm. And so, he must race against time, his white-patterned suit blurring as he moves through the chaos. Insane, clad in his protective gear, looks like a reaper brandishing 2 short daggers. He has become a mere afterimage, traveling and parading through the thick of the iron turtle rat tide. The viscous blood of the iron turtle rats doesn't even have time to splash onto him, so great is his speed. He seems to float away, leaving nothing but a trail of mangled carcasses in every place he passes. The head and the rear of every single iron turtle rat have been cleanly separated. The cuts at the fractures are perfectly flat, as if they had been polished by a master craftsman. But as we know, the time for such dominance is always far too short. 10 minutes pass in a flash, and Insane immediately feels his entire body becoming slow and clumsy. His perception and strength diminish simultaneously, and the iron turtle rats he had been catching by surprise begin to retreat into the shadows. As if sensing that Insane's peak state has passed its midpoint, the swarm immediately organizes a rather interesting counterattack. Insane, while dealing with the incoming assault, carefully scans his surroundings for a way out. He had killed over 1,000 rats in 10 minutes, yet that was only a third of them, leaving 2/3 still hungry for his life. He would have to keep fighting for another hour and a half or more, but his current state, as we can see, was no longer what it was during that initial burst. Sweat from his forehead was already dripping down inside his mask, soaking into the cotton lining of his gear. The warm vapor from his heavy breathing moistened the interior, occasionally blurring his vision in the heat of the moment. He knew he would need to trigger the cotton explosion at least twice more to clear the field, but his current fatigue made that a dangerous gamble. After a moment of reasoning, he realized the problem wasn't whether he could kill the iron turtle rats from his current position. The real issue was that launching 3 explosions in a row would likely cause him to collapse right there on that cold, boiling earth. He tried to push through, but he truly couldn't overcome the sheer weight of the swarm this time. Insane had to accept this, and with it, the rather disappointing reality of his situation. There is no shame in retreat, of course, but the rats he had already slain were worth a small fortune in points. He truly regretted having to give up like this, as he couldn't bear the thought of leaving those valuable carcasses behind. He hoped to return for the armor another time, knowing that if he didn't find a way to share this burden, he might not survive. He used what little strength he had left to carve a desperate path through the surrounding iron turtle rats. His only goal now was to escape to safe area number 38324. And then, of course, there was the matter of this relentless army of iron turtle rats blocking his way. It was as if he were trying to navigate a chaotic, nightmare version of a crowded city street. The tightening siege from the outside immediately forced him to reconsider the direction of his escape. Sensing a shift in the flow of battle, Insane brandished the god-hunting knife he had received from Manga. He stepped back 2 paces, partly because he had lost sight of the smaller rats, and partly out of pure frustration. To be honest, this army of ironclad pests was becoming a genuine nightmare for our hero. He recalled asking about this earlier, but no one had warned him it would be quite this difficult. He worried that this particular iron turtle rat might be up to something truly sinister. Could it be exactly as Ollie had mentioned the last time they spoke? It wasn't just growing. This iron turtle rat seemed to be becoming self-aware, which is a chilling thought. Now that it had been discovered, it no longer bothered to hide its true nature, openly flaunting its power. It tried to rise above the vision of its own kind, but Insane was quick to deliver a sharp kick. The creature fell to the ground, completely out of control, and that was when Insane pinned it down. He used every ounce of his remaining strength to drive the blade deep into its head. The blade went straight through to the back, leaving a section of purple intestine dangling from the exposed steel. Insane lifted it, staring at the human-like frame on its abdomen, his eyes lingering for just a moment. Everything about the scene felt uncomfortably like empathy, especially knowing this foot was treading upon a human frame. How many times has he gone through this cycle? He asked for your 5-star ratings and the support of his friends. But let's pause the writing for a moment. Thank you. First things first. We see him using the 101 palms technique as he returns toward the safe area, still focused on that human frame. He makes a cut with his knife, planning to take it to a God Hunter base within the circle. His goal is to reach a God Hunter base, even as he continues to trample over the creature beneath him. The area looks like a dense forest of trees, much like the circle where Mama Corn gives her approval. She even approved of it. He didn't recount the details, but regardless, this one won't be escaping either. This display of violent skill is far from over, as we are about to see. Insean continues to work with his knife, systematically killing Inju's iron-boned mole rat. Not long after, however, his body begins to feel the heavy weight of being overextended once again. This time, the physical backlash following such a display of violence is even stronger than the first. He feels as though his body no longer belongs to him, unable to keep pace with his own consciousness. We see the other iron-boned mole rats beginning to make their move. To his eyes, they don't seem particularly fierce, but he is utterly exhausted and pushed to his absolute limit. He looks at what remains of Inju's iron-boned mole rat. It has lost all recognizable form. There is simply no time to clean up the battlefield right now. Carrying that specimen with him, it's time for us to return and collect the reward. Just as he prepared to escape, he discovered that the iron-boned mole rats were no longer surrounding him for an attack. Instead, most rushed toward the black glass bottle containing insecticide scales nearby, leaving only a few behind. The iron-boned mole rats that still blocked his path were merely acting on pure instinct. Their attacks were harmless, barely even a nuisance. Without a brain to command them, they were no longer a threat. Once Insean finished with the surrounding swarm, he stopped worrying about the thousands gathered by the insecticide scales. His clothes were already completely drenched in sweat. Trapped inside that non-breathable defense suit, the heat was becoming unbearable, soaked to the bone. Insean finally pulled off his mask to find some relief. As he took deep breaths of the cold air, thousands of mole rats continued to swarm the insecticide scales. He returned slowly to the ruins, where he sat on the ground and watched them go with a lingering gaze. He decided he didn't want those insecticide scales, turning his attention instead to the debris on the ground. As he prepared to clear the area, he noted no one was around, exactly what his phone required. Naturally, the goal was to devour the divine remains to increase his strength, but strangely, the scales didn't react at all. He realized he would have to peel it as if it were a common crawfish. Bit by bit, using his keen sight, Insean casually gathered a hidden iron-boned mole rat and, holding a god-hunting dagger, began to clean its fur. He then looked down at the tiny piece of meat he was pinching between his thumb and forefinger. He stripped away a layer of death. It was clearly an iron-boned mole rat the size of a fist, worth 80,000 shells. It offered so little in return that it was even less profitable than a crawfish, yet he swallowed it in a single gulp. Although the meat was foul-smelling, the improvement it provided to his strength was barely perceptible. Only a very small, warm current surged through his body for a brief moment before vanishing entirely. He tried peeling 2 or 3 more, even going through the effort of peeling and eating the hardest iron-boned mole rat to kill. He still felt no real improvement, but his fingers were already starting to ache from prying at the shells. To be honest, eating this thing was proving to be more laborious than actually killing it. He turned his gaze back toward the scales. Insean took a few pieces and examined them with great care. He wondered if eating this part might also lead to some kind of problem. He found out soon enough. He struck the spines of the scale with his knife to break them down. Then, he swallowed that as well, but not being convinced of the result, he ended up coughing up a mouthful of blood. Covering his throat with both hands, he cursed the rough texture, realizing he had been far too reckless with the knife. He hadn't expected that after swallowing the scale, the sharp edges would directly cut his throat like a blade. Even after the piece reached his stomach, he still didn't feel any significant improvement or an increase in the heat current within his body. It was much weaker than eating the meat. It was, as Insean cursed in his heart, an absolute waste of time. With no trace of resources to be found, he completely abandoned the idea of eating the rest of the mole rat carcasses. Deciding it was better to just keep the original parts, he patiently began to sift through the remaining debris. Checking their abdomens for any original clips, he finally brought his long inspection to an end. More than 2,000 iron-boned mole rat carcasses had yielded fewer than 300 original clips, an utterly thankless task. Still, he now held more than 500 God Hunter points in his hand. He then pulled out the original clip from the carcass of the iron-boned mole rat that had been the hardest to kill. Counting them one by one with his fingers, 1, 2, 37, 18, he realized he was still missing 18 original clips. Due to sheer exhaustion, his vision began to blur, and he found himself counting 3 or 4 times without ever finishing. Regardless, there were at least 30 more, which meant several hundred more points for his collection. He had almost made it. If he hadn't eaten that cursed bell tablet, he might have felt even happier about his progress. Insean might have been the first boy to lose his head, but in the end, he could only feel the wound in his throat reopening in silence. Fresh blood welled up, and after spitting out several mouthfuls, he put his blood-stained mask back on. Shouldering his backpack, he headed back toward the exit of safe zone number 38324, drawing closer to the security gate. There, we see several god-hunting teams out on the prowl, their members watching him from a distance. The solitary figure of Insane left a lasting impression on the mind of every team member who saw him. They were left to guess his identity, whispering that they had never heard of him before. It seemed a solo expert had appeared among them, and they couldn't help but notice his scythe. He looks like Fan, they noted, but besides John, who else would have a Fan? And so, they wondered if Fan was actually John's soul, or perhaps something else entirely. She is Insane's insurance, his second way out of a tight spot. One shouldn't be so bold when making assumptions, yet many people there began to recognize Insane's identity. For a moment, everyone became far more interested in hunting him than in the uncertainty of hunting a god. It's better to go and see the spectacle. The first time he hunted a god, he was a solo team and earned 1,605 points in just 20 minutes. He had killed John, who was ranked 5th in points at the exit of safe zone number 38324. In these last few days, the emerging figures of renown, most of them sequence ability holders, have all heard whispers of him. But they hadn't seen him until today, as we watch him return to the safe zone exit after his hunt. They want to see if he truly possesses something divine, with one member even joking to his captain that he doesn't want to work anymore. They decide to pack up their gear and head back to watch, having heard that the last time a team was formed, it was a team of high-level abilities. The very first time he went out, he directly requested a divine transport worth 800 points. This time, they suspect there might be an even greater profit to be found. With Insane's appearance, more and more teams of sequence holders begin to gather. They actually suspend their god hunting for the day, feeling as though they couldn't even handle a simple task like holding back Santa Claus. We follow him from behind as he makes his way back to the exit of the safe zone. The massive gate of the safe zone begins to open slowly before him. Insane steps inside and removes his mask, finding a long line of teams waiting for their verification. As he approaches, the news of his return spreads quickly through the crowd. There are surely sequence holders following behind him who had been waiting for word of his arrival. A little later, an official follows him and says with a smile, Insane, you are the person with the highest god hunting score in the exit of safe zone number 38324. Which means, naturally, you have the unique right to skip the entire line. You can go directly to the front for your verification. Insane looked at the teams gathered at the verification point, his expression unreadable. To be honest, he didn't have the slightest desire to waste his time standing in line either. He simply wanted to finish his practice quickly and find a proper bath to wash away the day. After that, he planned to eat something, a little reward to fill his stomach after such arduous work. He intended to rest early, and since he wasn't in the mood for talk, he merely nodded and smiled to show his gratitude. Insane carefully slid his god-hunting scalpel and his blunt knife back into the sheaths at his waist. He kicked his mask aside and began walking with long strides toward the front, arriving directly before the verifier. In a brief, raspy voice, he announced that he, Insane, was there for his 102nd verification. He was in the middle of creating a legend, even if his voice remained remarkably low. But the scimitar at his waist was all the crowd needed to recognize exactly who he was. In an instant, a deathly silence fell over everything around him. They say a person's name is like the shadow of a tree. It stretches far beyond the man himself. Not everyone there had seen Insane in the flesh, but every single one of them had heard of his reputation. Immediately, several people moved behind Insane, eager to see the results of his practice this time around. Voices rose in the crowd, asking why everyone was squeezing in and if they were trying to skip the line. Others protested, claiming they weren't skipping, but simply trying to get a better look from outside the queue. Because of Insane's arrival, the verification line shortened immediately as people broke formation just to watch him. Everyone pressed closer, and it was then that Janso's recruiter spotted Insane cutting through. He immediately covered himself, as if terrified of being embarrassed in front of everyone by his own miserable appearance. He made no effort to hide his look of pure disgust at Insane's sudden intrusion. Insane had no interest in talking. He simply nodded his head to indicate he was heading into the line. However, his silence, the thick, bloody aura emanating from his entire body, and the murderous weight he carried after killing John, made everyone fear him even more. When Insane walked in front of the Janso counter, everyone automatically yielded 3 spots, including San Juan, who had been holding 5th place. He behaved just like the last time, obediently watching Insane recruit for Janso from within the crowd, though his gaze was heavy with meaning. And so, we find them meeting again. The Janso staff member who had recruited him before still held a favorable impression of Insane. Insane, however, had not forgotten the senseless malice that very same man had shown him during their last encounter. Back when the Janso staff was counting the relics, he had gone out of his way to deliberately annoy him. Insane was not a submissive person by nature, and besides, his throat was aching, making it even harder for him to argue with them. The manager seemed to miss the reason for Insane's obvious disgust and continued to act politely, offering his help. It was as if they were back in the year 14, a time when it seemed no one grew up at all. They had all become good friends, or so it seemed, and Insane felt a brief sense of relief. Life in the safe zone is interesting. Sometimes, you must do everything possible to prevent others from knowing you've killed. Other times, letting people know exactly how many lives you've taken is actually a very good thing. The Janso staff opened the backpack, and seeing it filled with countless relics once again, they looked at Insean in pure astonishment. But when he met Insean's calm gaze, he swallowed hard and hurried his work, as was expected in the rear area of post 38324. He had killed hundreds more of the mysterious creatures, and the staff's words immediately caused a massive stir in the crowd. What hundreds more? Did he blow up the entire nest of the flying turtles? The disbelief echoed through the crowd as Jan So placed the circular pieces from the backpack onto the platform to use the verification instrument. He scanned Insean's god-hunting remains and began the meticulous process of counting the relics one by one. Everyone stared at the circular relics, standing there in a state of slight, stunned disbelief. The appearance of these remains suggested they were iron-hulled algae, a sight not often seen in such quantities. Iron-hulled algae. We see that he had brought back hundreds of relics from those very creatures. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean he killed thousands of them. And yet, it was entirely possible. After all, last time he walked away with 80 jars of sequence samples. Now they stood at the site of the woman's death, wondering if he'd destroyed an entire nest, as his power was estimated at sequence level 3. It wasn't even that much of an exaggeration, considering what he could do back when his sequence level was only 1. He had wiped out a level 2 fish pond back then, and suddenly, everyone began to understand the truth. They realized that Insean was a ghost killer capable of taking down targets far above his own level. By their logic, he might now possess the strength of a sequence level 4 or even 5. This level of power had completely surpassed anything the crowd had ever known. We returned to the exit of safe zone number 38324, where the atmosphere remained heavy. In 5 long years, a sequence ability this powerful had never once appeared in their sector. After more than 10 minutes, the staff member stood up and looked at the 10 original film frames on the ground. He informed Insean that there were a total of 266 original film frames. He wondered aloud if, this time, the hall was still as unique as the last. Insean didn't say a word, but instead, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out yet another original film frame, while the staff member still held one in his hand. The staff member lowered his head to examine his hand, murmuring for a moment to himself. The packages were crowded so densely together that it was impossible to see clearly. He looked up at Insean, stammering in confusion, unable to process what he was seeing. It seemed he couldn't believe his eyes, and neither could the other sequencers watching nearby. They also watched with curiosity, thinking that in all their lives, they never would have imagined this. That this type of original film frame could ever appear at the exit of a safe zone at their level. A collective gasp rose from the surroundings as everyone crowded in to get a better look. The intake staff member licked his lips, his nerves clearly getting the better of him. He asked for a moment, admitting that he truly couldn't see the details clearly enough. He explained that he needed to use a machine to count and confirm the points of this original film frame. After saying that, his attitude became noticeably flattering, which, to be honest, was hardly surprising. He wanted to present Insean's hall, viewing Insean as nothing short of a natural-born god. It seemed that every time he appeared, he managed to bring a new surprise for everyone. The man was, after all, just a low-level worker within the administration. He realized that if he could only establish a relationship with Insean, perhaps he could gain some small benefit or even find himself on a fast track to a promotion. What he didn't know was that while doing this, he was raising a great deal of suspicion. In the end, people had turned bitter, but Insean simply gave a slight nod, indicating he was willing to wait. The staff member quickly pulled a device resembling a flashlight from his equipment case. He took the device and shone its light directly onto the original film frame. The screen on the side of the device immediately began to display subtitles. This particular original film frame was worth 185 points. Adding in the original film frame from before, the total came to 451 points. And so, he asked if, this time, Insean was still hoping to be recruited. Insean extended a single finger, as if to say, let me think this through for a moment. The man wanted to put him to the test, and Insean simply gave a calm nod. He nodded again, his expression remaining unreadable as he accepted the situation. Insean cast a glance over the entire shed, standing there like a silent, watchful observer. By a rough calculation, this was several times the amount of iron rings he had ever found. Looking at the others, Insean felt as though he were seeing a reflection of his own past self. But now, between him and these people, there was an unpredictable gap that hadn't existed before. The truth is, everything Insean had gained was the direct result of his own relentless effort. It wasn't a massive leap, but it all traced back to that day he fought outside the corridor. He had been nearly wiped out by that bird's eye, trained in a specific order of clouds and hands. It seems the wisdom of the ancients still doesn't quite hold up in a place like this. Insean let out a soft sigh deep in his heart and continued walking forward. The people in this session saw Insean and wanted to step forward to pitch their business to him. They were paying close attention, but the moment Insean actually stepped inside, and they saw the aura of blood clinging to him, they scattered like rain hitting the pavement. Word had it that some sequence users would use hunts outside the safe zone as a cover to eliminate their rivals, and Insean was currently covered in blood. When you return a loan like that, others can't help but let their imaginations run wild. After all, if you want to earn money, you generally need to be alive to spend it. Incian removed his mask, scanning the crowd at the end of the prophecy and raising one finger. Everyone stared at him intently, trying to guess the meaning behind that single raised finger. A quick comparison allowed Incian to master the bill, which included room fees, housing costs, laundry, and food, totaling over 700 barrel coins. To be honest, the low cost of these services far exceeded Incian's expectations. We see Incian processing the payment through an electronic account. After the money was transferred, the electronic shop owner sat at his desk, checking his latest post about Seninji. While he ate his noodles, the customer said nothing about his rest experience today. It made him feel quite comfortable. The two sat in the practice room, showing no signs of greed. It seemed they wanted him to return often and continue doing business with them. He told himself he would still be active in this area for a few more months. After the god hunt was over, he planned to find a more permanent place to rest. It would save him a lot of trouble, so he picked up the green card holder sitting by the computer. He pulled one out and tucked it into his backpack, recalling what he had discovered on the area forum. The detection board displayed a lively destination. It was City 141. This was the reporting area for the Outstanding Rookie King of the God Hunt. The title of Outstanding Rookie King of the God Hunt caught his eye. It seemed almost tailor-made for Incian, and he immediately clicked to view the details. The purpose was clear. City 141 included the safe zones ranging from 14,100 to 14199. As the safe zone took shape, we find that Incian was already located within City 141. To accommodate the safe zone, Wansaisan 100 in City 141 was now open for business. But with his current skills, he had never actually dealt with joint government work at a citywide level. But according to the description in this post, it seemed he might finally have the chance to broaden his horizons. As it turns out, the municipal government of City 141 is scheduled to hold a meeting this coming Monday. They intend to invite the rookie kings of the God Hunt from various safe zones, ranging from 14,100 to 14199. The goal is to offer praise and rewards, specifically to whoever is named the rookie king of that particular area. This title goes to the person who, among the newly promoted sequence users this past year, achieved the highest score in the God Hunt. The meeting isn't happening in person, though. Instead, the rookie kings from all over will be joining online. They will all participate in this teleconference, and Incian already knew he would eventually head to other areas to continue his studies. He didn't plan on staying in this area forever, so his interest in City 141 was somewhat limited. He initially felt very little interest in this organized gathering, but then, one specific sentence about the meeting caught his eye. It grabbed his attention immediately. Chapter 104, a reminder not to be unproductive. He told himself he wouldn't go, yet Incian couldn't help but look over the list of participants for the meeting. The joint government would be there, including the mayor of City 141 and the vice mayor. There would be city council staff and the director of the sequence meaning management office. Several other members of the management office staff were also listed as attendees. The directors from various management offices across City 141 would be present as well. Along with them, two specific members of the management office staff were scheduled to appear. Seeing the rookie king of the life hunt and two administration members, Incian realized something immediately. There was an opportunity here, a chance to make a move during the session's conference and the mayor's briefing. The selection of people from each area shouldn't just be about appearances, they needed to be truly capable in their roles. He knew that after a meeting organized by the city council, the participating councilors would surely bring great benefits to the community. The highly capable administrators and various district chiefs would certainly seize an opportunity like this. As for leaving things to his subordinates, Incian naturally had very little interest in the fame that came with his identity. He wasn't one to meddle in affairs that didn't concern him, whether out of loyalty to a predecessor or a desire for something more complex. Hoping his predecessor would release the latest version soon, Incian decided it was time to give the man a proper name. We see that the largest exit in the entire safe zone number 14121 is none other than exit number 38324. It turns out he holds the highest ranking for God Hunt points at that very exit, number 38324. This makes him the rookie king of District 14121, fully qualifying him to participate in the upcoming conference. However, even though the announcement was made last week, a strange silence had followed. He hadn't received a single call from the district government or the administration, which was a bit odd, to say the least. It seemed some people within the government or the administration were intentionally avoiding notifying him in advance. If both sides were conspiring to keep him in the dark, there was simply no way for him to know. Deep down, Incian felt this was the perfect chance to clear up everything regarding his predecessor. Since neither side was talking, he decided his first move would be to go and discuss the matter with his predecessor directly. Incian sent a private message, arranging a meeting at the administration building. While waiting at the entrance, he planned to see his predecessor first and then offer a small bribe to the boss. He handed over 500 independents for a new suit, as he had no desire to wear the standard protective gear provided at the entrance. A short time later, the boss returned out of breath, wearing a rather strained expression on his face. When asked if the suit was acceptable, Insean noticed the material felt remarkably similar to an Ollie uniform. It was nearly identical, and we know that a genuine Ollie uniform usually costs about 1,000 independents. In other words, the 500 independents he had provided weren't even enough to cover the cost of a Xeniansen. Insean asked how much it cost, knowing full well the boss didn't have much money to spare. Understanding that doing business isn't easy, Insean transferred another 1,000 independents before pointing toward the boss. He told him to be ready by phone tomorrow, as he planned to hunt gods and would need to be picked up. Furthermore, he expressed interest in hiring the chef permanently, insisting there was no need to return him. This was, quite remarkably, the longest sentence Insean had spoken since losing control of his throat. The boss of Yudiana nodded vigorously, assuring him that since they were like cousins, he had nothing to worry about. He promised the spark wouldn't fade, and then asked if Insean wouldn't prefer to take a rest. After paying for a day's rent and riding for over 2 hours, Insean shook his head and left with a faint smile. As soon as Insean departed, the Yudiana boss made a phone call, noting it was exactly 3 o'clock. We see that the boss had a good eye for style, as Insean had already changed into his new clothes. The suit fit him perfectly. It was even quite impressive, making him look like a member of the Public Transport Administration. Sensizin was already waiting when Insean approached, apologizing for making him wait so long. It was perfectly fine, though Insean could see that CG was truly heartbroken over the situation. From what we can gather, he had received a text message and rushed over as quickly as possible. Fearing any further delays, the two of them entered the administration building to be signed in by the leader once more. After inquiring about the detention office, Qian asked a few questions and then went to rest in the folding room. When two people suddenly entered, Qian immediately sat up, his instincts putting him on high alert. Once he saw clearly that it was Insean and Sensizin, he finally allowed himself to relax. Qian stood up to put on his shoes, asking with some surprise why they had come there. He mentioned he had things to do and, while grateful for the visit, insisted he could handle the matter himself. "I'm far too busy," Qian remarked, but as he spoke, Insean simply pulled out his mobile phone. He opened the first file, timestamped at 41:00, which had been intercepted from the bounty hunter. The file on Wanjibao's Iron Rank member was named Qian Wendao, and Qian began to stare intently at the screen. The more he read, the deeper his frown became, which, to be honest, was a perfectly reasonable reaction. Qian asked how he knew this since no one had been notified. Insean shook his head, noting not even the government knew. Insean continued to shake his head in silence, while Qian kept talking and watching him closely. Qian then asked if his throat was still bothering him, wondering if he had been injured while hunting the gods. He wore an expression that said, "No wonder," before returning to his state of deep, troubled concentration. We learned that this particular conference had only been convened once before, 5 years ago. He wasn't sure why it was being called again this year, though it was likely the city council's doing. They clearly wanted someone specific to appear at this conference, and Insean nodded in agreement. Just as he expected, he checked his records and discovered it was a rare, unusual situation. And this is how he uncovered the internal truth regarding the documents for this upcoming conference. They should have been sent out a long time ago, yet he hadn't seen them, and neither had Qian been notified. He suspected his colleagues were deceiving him, keeping him in the dark until the very last possible moment. They would only inform him to attend at the finish line. Insean nodded, confirming this suspicion. It seemed that 2 members of the administration staff had already been assigned to assist. Qian asked if everything had already been arranged, sensing that the pieces were moving without him. "Why come to me? Do you have some kind of plan?" he asked, looking for an explanation. Insean then spoke 8 simple words. "I will not go if you don't tell me." His voice remained hoarse, yet it cut like a sharpened blade, whispering directly into Qian's ear. "And what about you?" Qian asked, after listening intently to what had been said. Insean lowered his head slightly, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts as he spoke. This particular phrase meant that, in order to protect himself, he had to take a stand. He was perfectly willing to offend both the administration and the district government if necessary. He wanted to present himself as the new king, leading the district administration, though Qian wondered about their partnership. A normal cooperative partner wouldn't cause so much trouble for him, or so Qian questioned. Qian took another long, deep look at Insean, trying to read the man standing before him. Insean met his gaze firmly, feeling deep down that he hadn't chosen the wrong person to trust. Insean might have been a pawn in this game, but he was also a decent man. Initially, he had only wanted to befriend Insean because of his background and social position. But now he realized that Insean, on his own merit, was well worth the gamble. He had found a treasure. While someone like Litian Min would have accepted help instantly, Qian hesitated. He felt that making Insean pay his way was simply exhausting the relationship between them. There was no need to use up such favors, so he refused and told him not to do it. He insisted there was no reason for Insean to get involved in this particular pool of dirty water. Besides, he noted that they likely had no real evidence of any crime he might have committed. They couldn't actually touch him, and he was confident he could resolve these problems himself. "You're far too busy," Insean said, repeating the very phrase that Ji Jin Mincy had used before. And so, old Qian Wendao remained there, simply wasting his time in the silence. Your time and mine are far too valuable, he noted. Xian no longer called him elder, but spoke to him as a true friend. He spoke of Qian Wendao's history, hoping the man wouldn't take the favors of others too seriously. True friends, after all, are those who don't let mere sentimentalism cloud their judgment. That would only deepen the worry, and compared to simple favors, he asked him not to fret. Don't worry, he repeated, just solve the problem quickly and stop wasting time on such boring, trivial matters. Qian Wendao understood exactly what Xian meant and gave a firm, decisive nod. His triangular eyes seemed to sharpen, looking for all the world like two small, curved daggers. Very well, he said, thank you for the lesson, King Ai. We move to the King Unite market, where 105 bills are changing hands. Qian Wendao watched his mouth, his heart filling with a sudden, genuine joy. This was, to be honest, the proudest moment he had experienced in many years. It felt remarkably like the day he had first awakened his own virtual ability. He was about to hand the phone to Xian when he noticed the personal info in the corner showing monster hunting points. 2,502. Qian Wendao froze, pointing at the score and looking at Xian in total disbelief. So, we realize, he had somehow managed to gain another 900 points. Xian simply nodded, though he instinctively tried to hide the strain in his throat. That was how he got hurt. Qian Xuan, who was just about to ask, followed suit and stayed quiet. Xian had used the right knife, just like last time, thanks once again to those insect pills. Qian Xuan seemed restless. He never imagined that simple insect pills could bring Xian such a massive haul. Qian Xuan was visibly excited, and while Shi Dai was happy for Xian, he couldn't help but ask, Xiaoyin, have you found a special admission model yet? He asked. With a score that high, he could actually be specially admitted into a very good school. And we know that special admission students in university enjoy far more advantages than those from ordinary areas. It was a tempting prospect, but after saying that, Qian Xuan felt a wave of disappointment. It was a pity, really, as he didn't have a special admission model in his own hands. They headed to a data shop, noting that in the entire administration, only the director had heard of anything extraordinary today. Xian spoke up then, calmly mentioning that he already had a special admission. You actually got the model, Qian Xuan replied, looking even more surprised than before. Who gave it to you? Was it Zhou Xian? The moment he mentioned Zhou Xian's name, the excitement vanished from his face. Well, he figured there was no hope then, which, to be honest, was a fair assumption. First, he realized this could all be tied to deep-seated personal grudges. Second, he was well aware that what they said here was far from private. It simply wasn't the right place for a private chat, so he kept his thoughts to himself. Xian finally admitted that he was feeling a bit tired. He decided to head back and rest, and the others quickly agreed it was for the best. They were free to go, and Xian offered them a slight, weary smile. I'll see you on Monday, he said, and they echoed the sentiment as they parted ways. After Xian made his way down the stairs, we see him entering the main lobby. He found a member of the administrative staff to finally claim his hard-earned reward. The staff member looked up, immediately remembering who Xian was. The last time he had claimed a reward was earlier that very day, when Xian had walked away with 80 bottles of blood. Naturally, the staff held him in high regard, but they wondered how he could possibly be back for another reward so soon. Min Chan, the staff member, quickly pulled up the records to verify the information. Mr. Xian, congratulations, he said, noting that the young man had indeed earned something significant. As for the second group, their golden fortune seemed to radiate throughout the vast hall. We see the entire staff opening the reward boxes all at once, a coordinated effort for a rare occasion. The staff stared at the numbers repeatedly, feeling a deep sense of astonishment at what they were seeing. You can exchange this for 45 vials of Moyen FSU, which is equivalent to $451,000. In Hong Kong currency, that is. However, because he had killed 7 people at the Zone 14121 hospital, he was required to pay 14 cash bounties as a consequence of his actions. So, in the end, he was eligible to receive the 45 vials of Moyen FSU, which, after the deductions, amounted to 437,000 Hong Kong dollars. Xian offered his thanks as the staff prepared the 43 vials of Moyen FSU for him. The clerk then inquired about his privileges at security zone exit number 38324. It turned out his status increased the cash reward by 10%, so they handed over the additional funds. That came to 14,018 Hong Kong dollars, with the remaining 1,100 being transferred to his electronic account. Xian took his belongings under the envious gazes of the crowd and calmly walked out of the administration building. Standing to one side was Sun Sisan, who watched Xian as if he were looking at some kind of monster. He had joined the God Hunter squad himself, where usually 5 people struggle for days just to earn a few points. And once those points are divided among the whole team, he barely ends up with anything at all. We have to wonder how anyone could possibly be like Xian, who seems to find a fortune every single time he returns from a hunt. It is almost as if he has found a wholesale supplier for high-value goods, which is quite an enviable position to be in. Watching him improve at such a mad pace, Sun Sisan felt a desperate urge to cling to Xian's coattails and rise to the top alongside him. But as we know, Insean has always been a solitary soul who prefers to act alone. He believed that bringing someone else along would be useless, as it would only serve to cut his own odds in half. And so, poor Sisan could do nothing but keep that small hope tucked away in his heart. While hunting gods together was unthinkable, he knew that simply maintaining a good relationship with Insean was a power in itself. After the two of them said their goodbyes, Insean found himself alone once more. He returned to the warehouse at the cyber cafe, where he spotted a young man waiting outside the building. As Insean approached, he realized that a brand new bathroom had been installed for him. It seemed the young man wanted to build something for himself, and the noise eventually caused Insean to wake up. Such was the reality of living in a cyber cafe. He had intended to get some rest, after all. He stepped back into the warehouse, thinking of the sequence he had seen for free, and decided to sit down and recover. This time, he fell into a deep sleep, allowing his weary body to begin its rapid recovery process. However, his body suddenly trembled with such violence that it nearly lifted the entire bed off the floor. He rubbed his head, not quite understanding what had just happened, and glanced at the time on the wall. The screen on the table confirmed his suspicion. It was already 2:30 in the morning. Ever since he had upgraded his sequence level, his body had become unusually alert to his surroundings. He could always perceive subtle changes and the approach of danger, and yet, this felt different. To be honest, this was the very first time his body had forced him awake while he was in the middle of sleeping. Insean was immediately on high alert, certain that this strange sensation couldn't just be an unfounded hunch. Suddenly, we hear a faint, scratching sound coming from the ceiling of the warehouse. Insean looked up, but at first, he saw nothing but the ordinary ceiling above him. Then, a red light appeared, a small glowing point that began to expand slowly across the surface. Viscous substances began to seep through the cracks, dripping down with agonizing slowness. Looking closer, he realized it was a red-hot iron ventilation cone melting its way through. The iron cone was slowly burning a jagged hole right through the roof. The intense heat forced him to step back as he examined the edges of the hole, which were made of a specialized material. Everything had melted into blackened edges, dripping onto the computer desk and the floor below. This was definitely the work of a sequence ability, and a dangerous one at that. Insean immediately sat up on the edge of his bed, his senses fully engaged. At that moment, more strange objects made of bone and metal began to fall continuously from above. He watched from the bed as the debris fell through the hole, some of it splashing onto the computer screen. A thick cloud of smoke billowed out, and as the liquid hit the floor, it instantly sprouted thin, creeping vines. The vines grew thicker by the second, twisting across the floor like a nest of writhing snakes. As they tangled themselves around the table and the computer, a dark, oily smoke began to rise. This black smoke was pungent and foul, smelling like a sickening mix of rotting food and burnt plastic. Insean didn't waste a second, immediately pulling on his poison-proof wind mask. Even though his vision was partially blocked, he could tell he was already being affected by the fumes. The smoke was poisonous, and it was clear to him now, someone was trying to kill him. Insean secured a box that appeared to be a complete sequence set, waiting until the visitor reached 80%. They were coming for him. Lishanman had already warned him that carrying dozens of sequence flasks would certainly draw eyes. And so, he had chosen this place to settle down and wait. He was in a school full of surveillance, yet he never expected someone would come to kill him only 2 days after leaving the director's office. Was it a strong sequence? He suspected this very table was likely being watched at this moment. Feeling a flicker of pride in his readiness, he kicked the sequence-like box aside. He moved beneath the warehouse shelf, rushing toward the door with his Godhunter pistol and one knife at the ready. He prepared to leap onto the warehouse roof, because for someone with his lethal experience, simply running was never the goal. Escaping is merely delaying death. After all, he knew that only by killing the enemy can one truly survive. Just as he was about to throw open the warehouse door, his eyes widened and he suddenly pulled back his weapons. He sensed more than one presence, realizing there were others opposing him besides the shameless person from before. Someone else had scattered the growth potion for those poisonous vines. They weren't just accomplices, it meant there were at least 2 different people waiting on the roof. And since there were already 2 people positioned above him, then the enemy must have 1,000 faces, perhaps even sending an elder to ensure the kill. He realized there must be an ambush right in front of the door, waiting to strike a single, fatal blow the moment he emerged. We see that there are 2 ways for sequence ability users to take a life. Brute force is the most direct way, of course, but it is certainly not the only way. Insean found himself unable to lock onto the sequencer lying in wait at the central door. With a single strike, the enemy vanished, but as the vine chaos grew, the black smoke became increasingly impenetrable. If he doesn't escape soon, he will be completely overwhelmed by the poison spreading through the city. Insean stood perfectly still for a moment, wondering what kind of ability the sequencer waiting at the door might possess. He had no idea, really, but the sequences of the 2 on the roof were already clear to him, a smith and a host master. We see that these two sequence ability users share one very specific and rather annoying characteristic. They only reveal their abilities when they intend to deceive. Incian looked up, and the corners of his mouth curled into a slight, knowing smile. Meanwhile, on the roof, two individuals dressed in non-alliance clothing were busy chatting like old friends. One of them asked in a sudden panic why there was no movement coming from inside the warehouse. Wondering if he had already fainted, the other person simply gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. He told his companion not to worry, claiming his own wound didn't even hurt anymore. The Nobu fragrance would continue to drift through the air, doing its silent work. If he hasn't emerged from the warehouse yet, they would simply wait another 20 minutes. He will definitely pass out by then, and that is when they would make their move and go inside. The plan was simple: kill him and use brute force to change their appearances. Still, one of them felt a lingering sense of unease, thinking it was a bit dangerous for them to be standing there. He suggested they go down and regroup with the other three, just to be safe. But his partner scoffed, asking where could possibly be safer than this 10-square-li warehouse roof. Even if Incian was the host who unlocked the Divine Strike sequence, facing three backs at once would be too much. He assumed the others were already below, perhaps even locked in combat with Incian at that very moment. Is there really anywhere safer than this spot? Well, his partner eventually agreed that there wasn't. Before they could even finish their conversation, a fist suddenly burst through the roof, right beneath their feet. It struck the one known as Ojo directly in the chin, leaving him stunned and collapsing right where he sat. The other individual fell backward as stiffly as a piece of timber, completely caught off guard. Before he could even think of escaping, he was pinned against the roof panels by Incian's female companion. Targeting the throat with demonic precision, Incian surged forward once more and delivered a brutal kick to the man's head. He smashed the man's face downward, then grabbed both individuals and unceremoniously tossed them off the roof. Outside the warehouse, the three men dressed in white heard the sudden commotion coming from the roof. We see them freeze as they listen to the movement inside the warehouse, each of them visibly startled. They began to wonder what on earth was happening, and what could have possibly befallen Oso Violento and Fuyen. Did they somehow slip through a weak spot in the roof? To be honest, it seemed like a ridiculous theory. One of them asked if they had fallen inside, but the captain could only offer a shrug of uncertainty. The question then became whether they should prepare to head inside and take a look for themselves. The captain refused, noting that based on the noise, Incian was clearly wide awake and active. Entering now would be far too dangerous, and he wasn't about to take that risk. They decided they must wait until he finally succumbed to the fragrance and passed out completely. He reminded them that this was a man capable of killing Ion, which was reason enough to be cautious. The others agreed, though they remained on edge as the situation began to spiral out of their control. As they stood there shouting, none of them imagined that Incian could have actually leaped onto the roof. Nor did they expect him to neutralize two of their people with such terrifying speed. Meanwhile, we see Incian lying low at the edge of the roof, watching and waiting for his next move. While listening to the conversation of the three men below, and with Oso Violento and Fuyen neutralized, he opened his mobile phone. What a strange coincidence, to be honest, a rather lucky one, that he had entered the corpse of the God Devourer. We see that in Zone 14121, there is a combat group strategist known as Fanfu. And then there is a lawbreaker named Fuyen. Both of them now belong to the same Goxlayer's team. The name of the team leader, San Juan, immediately surfaced in Incian's mind. He remembered him well, that man with the peculiar long hair covering his face. It turned out to be San Juan's team after all, and he certainly possessed significant military strength. Besides Balboa and Fuyen, who had been crushed inside the warehouse, there were others to account for. There are three more individuals remaining, including Juan and Zen, who acts as the receiver. Along with Ion-Su Smith, the pitcher, deep down, Incian already understood exactly what their plan was. It seemed their strategy was for Juan and Zen to protect the perimeter, followed by a move from Ion-Su. He would initiate the attack with a stun, while San Juan provided cover by striking from a distance. He knew he had to move quickly if he wanted to dismantle the three of them before they could react. The moment he leaped onto the warehouse roof, he activated his violence ability. If he delayed any longer, he would fail. After all, this was the third time he had used it in 24 hours. He would be completely drained of strength once the effects of the skill finally wore off. He couldn't afford a prolonged fight, so he glanced sideways, calculating his next strike. Speed was his only ally now, and he kept a watchful eye on the targets below. He recognized San Juan, of course, but the other two were still somewhat of a mystery. The one wielding the axe was likely Ion-Su, while the one without the hair had to be Juan and Zen. He seized the opportunity and leaped down from the warehouse roof. Like a cannonball, he landed squarely on the head of Juan and Zen with a heavy thud. The impact was so immense that the man's head was pressed directly into the ground. Juan and Zen found themselves unable to communicate. In fact, their entire face was now one with the dirt. Incian had attacked directly to eliminate the most important person, the one who controlled the group's movements. San Juan and Ion-Su, standing nearby, were utterly terrified by Incian's sudden and violent appearance. They were about to defend themselves, but we see that their strength in every aspect was lacking. They were far inferior to Insean, whose only real disadvantage lay in his lack of sequence weapons. Even so, Insean shattered Sanwan's sense of invincibility with a single, devastating punch. He then snatched the spear from his hands and, with a furious strike, drove it through Ion Su's remains. The weapon emerged from the other side, and just like that, the violent confrontation was over. Insean moved toward the wall, gasping for air as the wound in his throat began to throb. Because it was filled with poison again, thanks to that mad monster, he began to sweat profusely. As he looked over the scattered bodies, he began to wonder how he would explain all of this. Reporting the case would be difficult, as the toxins from the poisonous head could easily corrode a brain. Therefore, the memories of Balboa and Fuyin in the warehouse could not be read by any ability user. Wan and Zen's skull was already crushed, and Ion Su's had been pierced through by San Wan's own spear. As for San Wan, his own skull had been completely shattered by Insean's fist. With the brains of all three damaged, it was impossible for anyone to extract their memories. So, when it came to telling the specific details of the case, only Insean held the answers. First, he carefully wiped his own fingerprints off the spear. Using San Hufin's right hand, he positioned the palm to make it look as if he had been holding the weapon. He opened the warehouse door to let the poison drift over the three bodies, ensuring all evidence was thoroughly covered by the toxins. He even took several deep breaths of the poisonous air himself, waiting until he felt dizzy and faint. Only then did he call the sequence ability administration, a bold move, to be sure. Is the administration worthy of such a call? Well, in this case, they most certainly were. The death of 5 sequence ability users is the most serious incident in the history of Safe Zone 141. A rare occurrence, really, a separate case that stands out in the records. We are introduced to the director of the Sequence Ability Administration, Feng Shouwen. Information regarding Insean reaches his brain simultaneously with the reports of the scene. Reports of Insean's death reached him, but he has different news from Orob. He won't miss a single detail concerning our protagonist. And at this very moment, we see that Insean is being subjected to a precise and rigorous investigation. His face is deathly pale, showing the unmistakable and painful signs of severe poisoning. He looks truly pitiful, struggling to hold himself together under the pressure. Feng Shouwen and Orob stand to one side, listening intently as the administration staff interrogates Insean. It is a strange scene indeed, marking the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter. Are you saying that while you were sleeping, a poisonous head suddenly grew out of you? The investigator asks. It supposedly emitted gray smoke, and then he lost all ability to move his body. Is that how it happened? Then, suddenly, a hole opened in the roof and 2 people fell through, already half dead. They were lying on the ground, already unconscious, or so the story goes. After you identified them, we learned those 2 are Balbo and Fuya. After that, Johnson supposedly jumped down through the hole in the roof. Yes, Johnson stole your sequence and was just about to make his escape. Then the door opened, and Juan Neeson entered the warehouse scene. They discovered that Johnson had killed his own companions, and naturally, doubts began to surface. Yes, as we saw in the scene, it truly appeared as if Johnson had turned on his partner. Johnson killed Wang Gisin before leaving, and then, just as he was about to kill Zunjifan, they both died together. The administration staff bit their lips, their faces turning pale at the sheer absurdity of the report. So, are you saying all 5 originally wanted to steal your sequence, but Johnson suddenly changed his mind? He wanted to kill his teammates, but he didn't swallow them, and they all died instantly, or so he claims. And then you recovered your sequence. Yes, this is perfectly logical. In a way,